Chapter 2015. Although everyone knew the outcome, they were still unwilling to accept it. They wanted to do something to change the situation. However, they could not think of any solution and fell into self-blame. It could be said that Mu Yang was in the most pain right now. This was because his cultivation was the highest among everyone present, and he also had a good weapon. However, there was nothing he could do. All he could do was sit there and wait for death. "Everyone, why don't you all run for your lives?" Sun Yukai suddenly said. As soon as these words came out, everyone looked at the deputy city lord, their eyes full of resentment. Sensing the dissatisfaction, Sun Yukai helplessly smiled bitterly. As long as you're still alive, you can still leave a sliver of hope for the flowing cloud world after this storm passes. If everyone were to be buried here, even if that great character were to be magnanimous and let us off, the profound fighting world would definitely come to take revenge. At that time, the flowing cloud world will truly fall into its darkest period. Chu Tain nodded slightly. His gaze towards Sun Yukai had changed once again. As expected of someone Xiaoyang had entrusted with such an important task, even in such a dangerous situation, he was still able to leave a path of retreat. It could be said that he had left a path of survival for the flowing cloud world. No one blamed Sun Yukai for saying such words. They all knew that he had gone through a lot of trouble to do so. After all, even if Xiaoyang was gone, the flowing cloud world would still exist. If they lost all their peak battle prowess, it would truly be a disaster. Is there really no way at all? Qian Guangqi stomped his foot in dissatisfaction. No one replied to him. If there was a way, they would not be at a loss and waiting for death here. Xiao, Chongqing, and Old Master Xiao were the most upset because they were all members of a Xiao family. How could they not be pained that such an outstanding junior was about to die? Without sufficient strength, it was an original sin, and no one could change that. If they were strong enough, they would not be here. Although they had tacitly agreed to Sun Yotsai's suggestion, they were still unwilling to leave this place. Great-Grandpa Xiao, I remember that you once fought against the Devil Realm and used a very terrifying joint attack formation. I remember that the city lord had left behind a lot of ancient scrolls on magic arrays. Let's go and look for them. Let's see if there's any offensive magic array that can match this universal orderliness array. Sun Yukai suddenly had an idea. There were 5 Class 9 powerhouses here, and the Heavenly Cycle Array was built on top of a pseudo-spiritual vein. If they were used well, they might be able to unleash a decent amount of power. When Old Master Xiao heard this, he was overjoyed and said, "Come with me. Let's search together." Right now, it could be said that they were in an urgent situation. So what if Mu Yang and Chu Tain were not from Borealis City? However, as long as he could find a solution from those secret scrolls, everything would be worth it. For a moment, the flames of hope were ignited in everyone's hearts once again. If they could really find such a terrifying magic array, they would be able to help Xiaoyang. You guys go and look. I'll gather all the cultivators above Class 5 in Kingwu, Sun Yukai said. Everyone received the order and left without any hesitation. In the sky, Xiaoyang was already panting after dealing with 3 palm strikes. It could be said that each palm strike was stronger than the previous one. The force was also becoming more and more tyrannical. Xiaoyang was already showing signs of being unable to block it. In the face of such a huge difference in cultivation level, he was helpless and could not do anything. Seeing Xiaoyang's expression become more and more serious, Han Jingming felt more and more comfortable. After the other party knew the difference in strength, he would only become more and more afraid. Moreover, that hope would continue to dwindle, followed by despair. "Little guy, I haven't even used my full strength, and you're already like this. What do you have to fight me? So what if you have 5 spiritual veins? In my eyes, it's just a show. It's completely useless," Han Jingming said with a smile. Xiaoyang sneered and said, "Don't you blush when you say that? We're not in the same cultivation level to begin with. For me to be able to block 3 of your palm strikes. Do you think I'm too strong, or you, a martial emperor, are useless? Han Jingming remained indifferent in the face of such mockery. How could he not know such a simple provocation? It was because he knew it too well that he felt nothing. I think you're only good at talking. Tell me, did you get to where you are today by relying on your glib tongue? Han Jingming mocked back. In terms of mocking their opponents, both of them had extraordinary attainments. Both of them were old foxes. How could they find the other party's way so easily? Xiao Yang's mind started to work quickly. It was only 3 palms, and he was already having a hard time. It would only be more difficult for him to continue. Then, Xiao Yang changed his mind and rushed out, completely ignoring Han Jingming. From Xiao Yang's point of view, since the other party's attention was completely on him, he would take him out of drifting cloud world first. Then he would continue to run until the reinforcements from the realm of gods arrived. However, when he saw Xiao Yang running away, Han Jingming was indifferent. He stood on the spot and did not move at all. Just leave. It doesn't matter even if you escape to the realm of gods. After all, you can leave, but you can't leave drifting cloud world. Since I can't beat the monk, destroying the temple isn't bad either. Han Jingming laughed. Xiao Yang seemed to have turned a deaf ear to these words as he continued to charge forward. At this time, Han Jingming threw out another palm. However, it was not aimed at Xiao Yang, but the North Light City beneath his feet. Instantly, Xiao Yang's expression changed drastically. He had no choice but to retreat and block the attack. Seeing Xiao Yang return, Han Jingming's lips curled into a proud smile. As expected, it was similar to what he had expected. Xiao Yang was very important to drifting cloud world. If there were any changes, he would definitely not leave easily. He would even use his life to protect this world. Since that was the case, everything became simple. Although Han Jingming's actions were more or less gambling, he would never lose. So what if Xiao Yang did not care about drifting cloud world and left? He was a martial emperor. Could it be that he could not catch up to King Wu? Chapter 2016. It had to be said that Han Jingming was a cunning old fox. He had a good grasp of his enemy's mentality. He knew that the other party cherished his world very much. Therefore, no matter what the situation was, he would come back to save it. As long as he attacked the drifting cloud world, Xiao Yang would not just stand by and watch. He would even do his best to protect it. If it was any other place, he could still take a gamble. However, this was his hometown. He could not afford to gamble. Moreover, if an accident really did happen, he would only suffer a crushing defeat at that time. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Yang appeared above the North Light City in a flash. His sword soared into the sky and shattered the palm print. However, at the same time, countless forces bombarded his body mercilessly. In an instant, under the impact of the huge force, Xiao Yang's brows were almost knitted together. Intense pain kept coming from his limbs and bones, almost causing him to faint. Facing a martial emperor, even if the other party was severely injured in the battle with the God Realm, it was still difficult for Xiao Yang, even with King Wu's extreme realm, to fight against him. Fortunately, Xiao Yang's will was still there. Moreover, his body was tough to begin with. Therefore, he was only shaken up. Otherwise, all the meridians in his body would have been shattered by this attack. A martial emperor was so terrifying. Even if it was just a casual attack, it was still extremely terrifying. It was not something that an ordinary person could withstand. Now, Xiao Yang's face had turned ugly. After these few exchanges, although he had not sensed the peak of his opponent's strength, he was already at his limit. Kid, you should continue to run. It's okay. I won't chase after you. However, I'm afraid that the drifting cloud world will no longer exist. As Han Jingming spoke, the corners of his lips curled up. He was indescribably proud. Since the other party had such restraints and fears, he could do whatever he wanted. Next, it wouldn't be a problem to torture this kid. Who would have thought that one of the few martial emperors would be so despicable and shameless? This is the first time I've seen such a thing. Xiaoyang snorted coldly and mocked. Right now, Xiaoyang did not dare to leave because of the flowing cloud world. He could only forcefully stay here. If the other party did not use this to threaten him, then Xiaoyang still had a way to escape. But now, he was tied up and unable to move at all. In other words, he had no way out and could only fight. Han Jingming merely smiled indifferently. He did not take these mockery to heart, as he said in a low voice, "It's meaningless to say all this. So what if I'm despicable and shameless? You've already said it yourself. I'm already a stray dog now, so why should I care so much? All of that is meaningless." Now, Han Jingming had a clearer understanding of the situation. Since he had already lost control of the Greenly world and his family had been destroyed, he was free to do whatever he wanted. Hearing these words, Xiaoyang felt extremely helpless. Against such an old fox, there was really nothing he could do. However, he wasn't willing to accept the outcome. Therefore, he was also thinking about what he needed to do to turn the situation around. Since there was no way out, he could only fight to the death. However, Xiaoyang didn't want to die. Therefore, he had to carve out a path for himself in this life and death battle. At least, from Xiaoyang's point of view, the only one who could survive here was himself. Although such a thought was laughable from Xiaoyang's point of view, as long as he grasped every detail, he might still have a chance to win. If his state of mind became hopeless, then he would really be sending himself to death. Indeed, a dog doesn't need to talk too much about morality, Xiaoyang said coldly as he waved the divine sword in his hand. At the same time, Xiaoyang's aura began to surge wildly. Since there was no way out and no choice, he could only fight with all his might and fight for a chance of survival. Even though the chance was very slim, there would only be a result after trying. Sensing Xiaoyang's aura constantly rising, Han Jingming could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. He thought to himself, could it be that this guy didn't use his full strength previously? After having this thought, Han Jingming was a little surprised in his heart. This was really a little unbelievable. You are indeed very strong. But so what if you are strong? You still can't change the current situation in the end. No matter what you do, it's useless. Han Jingming said coldly. Although Han Jingming's tone was still nonchalant, his expression had become a lot more solemn at the moment. This was because he had also sensed that many things were not as simple as he had imagined. Since this was the place where Xiaoyang made his fortune, he might really have some tricks up his sleeves. He had to be careful. Although Han Jingming did not think that Xiaoyang really had the ability to kill him, he did not want to be seriously injured. After all, he had not recovered from his previous injuries. If there were new injuries, it would not be good news. Xiaoyang just smiled and did not respond to him. Instead, he channeled his spiritual power into the Thunderfire Divine Sword. At this moment, his essence, qi, and spirit rose directly to the peak. It was extremely terrifying. For a time, lightning and flames surrounded Xiaoyang's body. The surrounding aura also began to become extremely violent because of the release of his power. It was as if everything was greatly affected and out of control. The pressure in the air also began to become tense as the battle intent and aura of the two rose. The pressure in the air was even more terrifying. If an ordinary King Wu powerhouse was here, he would probably be unable to breathe. In the next moment, Xiaoyang moved. He roared, and the Thunderfire Divine Sword in his hand also danced. Countless sword auras were released in an extremely violent manner. At this moment, the sword auras also began to spread rapidly and wrapped Xiaoyang tightly. It was as if there was no attack that could shatter this sword defense. It was just that powerful. Xiaoyang also made up his mind. He did not continue to stall for time and took the initiative to attack. Since Han Jingming did not give him a chance to return, it was meaningless to continue the stalemate. Thunder Fire Sweep. Chapter 2017. For a moment, the two violent forces of thunder and fire turned into sharp sword chi. It was like a courageous warrior charging forward, not caring about its own safety at all. It only cared about charging forward. That terrifying aura immediately caused Han Jingming's expression to change slightly. He involuntarily inhaled a breath of cool air. This was because he could sense that the power of this attack was not to be underestimated. Although the power of this attack was not comparable to the attack of a martial emperor. However, the power of this attack was enough to bring King Wu's level of attack to a new extreme. Looking at the drifting cloud world, which was like a remote village, Han Jingming could not understand how it could give birth to such a talent. In a place like this, it would not be surprising if there were some valiant people. However, it was a little strange that such a tyrannical genius had appeared. At the very least, Han Jingming could not figure out what was going on. It could be said that this sword was extremely stunning. Everywhere it passed, the sound of explosions could be heard. Boom! Boom! Under such a powerful force, the surrounding space could not be maintained at all. It was constantly collapsing, which showed how terrifying this power was. As for Xiaoyang, he had already entered a state of full concentration. He had already abandoned all thoughts and focused on attacking. As for success or failure, why should he think so much? Xiaoyang had never been a hesitant person. After everything was confirmed, he had no way out. Hence, there was only one choice he could make. Even if death was the only way out, he had to find a way out. Han Jingming frowned slightly as he sensed the lightning and flames approaching him. Even his skin felt a piercing pain. This was because he could sense that the power of this attack could indeed injure him. In the next moment, Han Jingming growled and directly slammed his palm down. Immediately, an incomparably huge palm print appeared. In an instant, it could be said that the wind and clouds surged. Countless forces were constantly shattered by this palm. The power of this palm was terrifying. It was as if all the power was just a decoration in front of this palm. It was fancy and meaningless. However, Xiaoyang was not a pushover. Even in the face of such a terrifying attack, he did not show the slightest bit of emotion. In fact, in the end, it was because he was too clear about the current situation. There was no room for him to be hesitant. Once he was hesitant, only death would await him. At this moment, countless amounts of energy poured down continuously. It was like a violent storm. It was extremely terrifying. Rumble. The sound of explosions could be heard continuously. At this moment, the three forces were crazily colliding. Countless forces were cancelled out. At the same time, there were also many forces that turned into aftershocks and blasted out. The power of this palm strike could be said to be extremely terrifying. If it had landed on Baixing City, it was likely that the newly built city would have been directly turned into nothingness under this palm strike. However, Xiaoyang was very determined. Although his speed had become much slower, he did not retreat at all. He was still moving forward. He allowed the aftershocks of the forces to bombard his body and continued to charge forward. In the blink of an eye, the palm force was completely cancelled out. Xiaoyang's move was also exhausted. However, he continued to charge forward as if he would not turn back until he hit a wall. When Han Jingming saw this scene, he was slightly surprised in his heart. Could it be that this guy had gone crazy? Since you are so eager to die, I won't fulfill your wish. Han Jingming sneered and said, if he did not torture this guy to death, how could Han Jingming be satisfied? Although he did not kill him, it would not be difficult to cripple him. In terms of controlling power, this old man had been practicing for a long time. Therefore, he was very familiar with this. He pointed his finger and was extremely tyrannical. Suppress for me. Xiaoyang roared and pressed down with his hand. Suddenly, a huge mountain appeared above Han Jingming's head and fell directly with unparalleled power. What appeared was Mount Tianqin, a sacred weapon. After feeling the pressure coming from above his head, Han Jingming's expression changed slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. As expected of the person who was able to become the champion of the realm of the gods and was favored by the Emperor God, Regardless of whether it was in terms of talent or the opponent, he could be said to be flawless. He displayed his full strength. It could be said that Xiao Yang's every plan was just right. It could be said that he had already used all his treasures to the extreme. However, in Han Jingming's opinion, this was just more of an unexpected surprise. After all, he did not belong to this realm. Therefore, he could not shake it and could not change the outcome. He could only continue to fall into despair after struggling with all his might. Soon after, Han Jingming let out a low shout and soared into the sky. He was prepared to knock the sacred level magical tool aside. Go! Xiao Yang roared. Immediately, the thunder fire divine sword in his hand left his hand and rushed towards Han Jingming's attack. In an instant, a bolt of lightning flashed and the silver lightning spear appeared in his hand. Xiao Yang dragged the silver spear and continued to rush forward. Between his brows, there was a look of determination and no fear. It could be said that in this attack, Xiao Yang had used all his skills. The purpose was to shake Han Jingming and achieve a result. It was to strengthen his confidence that his opponent was not unbeatable and would still reveal a flaw. As long as he could find that flaw, there was a very high possibility that he could defeat him. Although this sounded very unrealistic, like fishing for the moon in the water, sometimes these unrealistic things could become reality. Although the chances and probability of that happening were very small, the result could only be seen after trying. Han Jingming punched out, and the Tianqin mountain that was pressing down was sent flying. In front of this martial emperor, the sacred level celestial device was very weak and could not resist at all. At this moment, Xiao Yang had also arrived. The silver spear in his hand was already flashing with lightning. The lightning was like a huge dragon that was about to burst out and engulf Han Jingming's body and kill him. Murderous intent was revealed. Chapter 2018. Currently, Xiao Yang and Han Jingming were only 30 feet apart. It could be said that they were very close. As long as the spear could reach Han Jingming, it would be able to hit him. Of course, there was a prerequisite for this. That was, the other party had to give him an opportunity to do so. If Han Jingming dodged, then Xiao Yang's attack would miss. There was no way for him to succeed. Han Jingming turned his head and saw Xiao Yang charging towards him. Then he laughed disdainfully before he let out a low cry and slammed his palm downwards. Immediately, an extremely powerful force gushed out. In the blink of an eye, it had formed an extremely tough barrier that prevented Xiao Yang's spear from advancing any further. Those thunderbolts were quickly annihilated by this force. They had no chance at all. Han Jingming smiled. This kid was indeed powerful. However, how could he make up for the gap between their realms? Everything was already set in stone. No matter how hard you tried, you could not change it. After all, many things were destined to happen. You are indeed very strong. So strong that you are almost invincible in King Wu's realm. However, that is only limited to King Wu's realm. Han Jingming still appeared very relaxed as he smiled. Xiao Yang frowned and said, "It is still too early to say this. Since I am invincible in King Wu's realm, it is not impossible for me to defeat you." Han Jingming laughed when he heard this. He felt that this young man was a little too arrogant. It would be the strangest thing if he lost to this young man. Suddenly, Han Jingming frowned because he felt an aura coming towards him. Behind Han Jingming, the lightning fire divine sword had already dispelled the finger force. Moreover, it had turned around and attacked once again. What is this killing move? Han Jingming smiled disdainfully. In the next moment, with a roar, a force emerged behind Han Jingming. It was like a hurricane that was about to engulf the divine sword. However, the ending was not like that. The thunder fire divine sword was not affected by the hurricane and directly charged forward with great momentum. It was as if this sword was enough to pierce through that old fellow. However, in the next moment, the thunder fire divine sword seemed to be blocked by an invisible barrier, and it couldn't advance any further. Even though countless sword chi and force were wildly unleashed, there was nothing they could do. They could not advance even an inch. Han Jingming still had a smile on his face. Everything was as he had expected. This little guy's ability was almost on par with a martial emperor. However, it was still not enough to deal with an old fox like him. In the face of absolute strength, the slightest mistake could make a difference of 1,000 miles. Moreover, the gap between their cultivation levels was already like a natural chasm that was difficult to surmount. Xiaoyang shouted in a low voice and increased the strength in his hand. He was ready to stab the spear out, but it was useless. This was the terror of absolute strength. If one were to defend with all their might, so what if one were to use all their skills? Why struggle like this? Who knows, if you compromise, you might still be able to wait for the realm of the gods to arrive. What's the point of you charging forward like this? What you're doing is just digging your own grave. Look, I only have 2 hands now, and it's enough to suppress you until you can't breathe, Han Jingming said with a smile. It was as if he had always been thinking for this young man. However, Han Jingming's motive was very simple. He wanted to crush Xiaoyang's confidence bit by bit and make him accept this cruel reality. He wanted to make him feel completely hopeless and then slowly torture him. As for whether there would be any risks, at least from Han Jingming's point of view, there was no need to worry about this possibility. Xiaoyang gritted his teeth and continued to increase the strength in his hand. He didn't even care if he used up all the strength in his body at this moment, as long as he could shake his opponent. This method could be said to be very crazy. He didn't even think about how he was going to fight next. He directly put all his eggs in one basket. Therefore, from the start, Xiaoyang took out a stronger martial technique. Facing such an opponent, he could only use his proudest and strongest method to attack. In the northern light city, the backbone of the flowing cloud boundary, as long as they were in the city, were quickly gathered together. Many people raised their heads to look at the battle situation in the sky and found that their lord was actually completely suppressed by an external enemy. Everyone felt uncomfortable in their hearts. Many people were already in despair and felt that a calamity was already about to befall them. Although they had received Sun Yotsai's order to gather here and wait for further orders, they knew their limits. Even their lord couldn't do anything to that old man. With their little bit of strength, they couldn't even be considered as ants. What could they do to help? Perhaps this method would only add to the trouble. Sun Yukai was also very anxious now. He knew that the city lord couldn't hold on for too long, so they had to speed up. However, because he had no idea what to do, he could only stand there anxiously, unable to do anything. This was complete torture for Sun Yukai. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. On the other side, under the lead of old Master Xiao, everyone arrived in a secret room. They began to flip through the ancient texts left behind by Xiaoyang, hoping to find some clues. Qian Guangqi could be said to be very distraught right now. He seemed to be extremely impatient during the search this time. He basically only glanced at each scroll twice before tossing it to the side. On the other hand, old Master Xiao and Xiao Chongxing were extremely calm at this moment. This was because they knew that this was a meticulous task that couldn't be rushed. After a long while, Arctic Gray Feather suddenly cried out, "Senior Muyang, quickly come over and take a look. Is it this scroll?" Muyang and Chu Taiyin immediately walked over when they heard that. They took the scroll from Arctic Gray Feather's hands. The two of them opened the scroll and began to judge from the beginning to the end whether this formation could be constructed on top of the universal order formation. They had already taken a look at the heavenly cycle orderly formation earlier. Although they weren't very proficient in it, they understood what it meant. Moreover, with old Master Xiao and Chu Taiyin's explanations, it wasn't a problem for them to understand the sequence. Chapter 2019. Looking at Xiaoyang, who was still fighting with all his might, Han Jingming knew that he was already at the end of his moves, but he was still forcing himself to improve. However, this was enough to show that Xiaoyang really wanted to win this battle. That was why he was working so hard and unwilling to miss any opportunity. Han Jingming saw that the little guy was resisting so fiercely, but he was not surprised. Instead, he was even happier. After all, the more the prey struggled, the more pleasure the hunter would feel. Therefore, Han Jingming also hoped that Xiaoyang would be able to stir up even more waves. In that case, he could enjoy himself even more. Perhaps he could vent a lot of the grievances that he had suffered in the Greenly world. At the same time, Han Jingming was also very impressed. A little guy like him had relied on his own abilities to reach where he was today, and even wanted to help improve his own world. Such a person was indeed worthy of respect. However, there was a conflict between them, and this battle was unavoidable. Moreover, admiration was one thing, but the grudges between them still had to be settled clearly. After living for a few thousand years, Han Jingming had already seen through many problems and knew what he should do. Moreover, he was clear about all of this, without any other emotions mixed in. You said that you are working so hard for this world. Is it worth it? Why not slip away and join the realm of the gods? A poor and remote place like this is not worthy of you. Han Jingming took a deep breath and said, although these were words of comfort, Han Jingming knew that Xiaoyang had built his own world, instead of joining the realm of the gods directly like Lei Dingtan. It was clear that he had deep feelings for this world. If he could crush the beliefs in his heart, it would be even better. Xiaoyang only sneered and said, we are all old foxes. What's the point of saying this? Han Jingming only smiled. Naturally, he understood this logic. However, sometimes a sentence could be the straw that broke the camel's back. Therefore, it was not bad to give it a try sometimes. Who knows, there might be unexpected results. No matter what it was, the results could only be obtained after trying. After all, the world was unpredictable and people were changeable. Who knew when it would change with a single thought? After the change, there would definitely be many repercussions. It was even possible that he would be in so much pain that he would wish he was dead. To Han Jingming, if he only wanted to kill Xiaoyang, it would be very easy for him to do so. However, would this be enough to quell the anger in his heart? Obviously, this was not enough. Therefore, he wanted to use all his means to make this kid regret what he had done in the past. And all the consequences that led to this incomparably miserable end was caused by his meddling in other people's business. After all, sometimes death was not painful. If he could make them suffer a fate worse than death, that would be incomparably satisfying. Xiaoyang gritted his teeth and closely observed the changes in Han Jingming's emotions and power. As long as the other party showed the slightest flaw, he would immediately make a move and turn the situation around. However, it was not an easy task to change it. In the boundless sea of stars, two powerhouses were hurrying as fast as they could. When they received the news, they did not stop to rest. They wanted to get to the drifting cloud world in the shortest amount of time possible. This was because they knew very well that the journey was long. If they were late, they might lose all clues. If they went earlier, they might be able to gather more information. At that time, they would be able to find the old fox and kill him, allowing the portion of fortune to return to the world. How long do you think Xiaoyang can last? Emperor Qin asked helplessly. In reality, Emperor Qin already had an answer in his heart. The difference between a martial king and King Wu was like the difference between heaven and earth. It was already good enough that he was not instantly killed. Emperor sighed helplessly. He was clearly very dejected. If Xiaoyang is willing to part with the drifting cloud world, or if that old guy isn't so despicable, Xiaoyang might be able to escape. Hearing this, Emperor Qin frowned slightly. He naturally knew that since Xiaoyang wanted to bring the drifting cloud world to form an alliance with the god world, it was obvious that he was unwilling to part with the drifting cloud world. Therefore, it was almost impossible for him to give up on the drifting cloud world. Of course, this matter is not without a chance of turning around. After all, Xiaoyang destroyed the great taboo of the Greenly world. I don't believe that old guy would be willing to kill him directly instead of torturing him for 100 years. Emperor De's tone became more serious as he spoke. In the Tomb of the Gods, Xiaoyang had made a great contribution to the god world. He was an existence that turned the tide, but now he had to bear the consequences. Emperor De did not feel good in his heart. He felt that he had let down this future ally of his. Even though Emperor De's residents treated Xiaoyang well, Emperor De felt that it was not enough. Moreover, they valued this kid's potential and talent more. Perhaps he could really soar to the sky in the future and be comparable to Princess Mingzhu. At the very least, there was a possibility. It was not completely hopeless. The Duke of Qin's expression became much more serious because of this. He realized that there were indeed many opportunities for him to turn this matter around. However, there was one thing that could not be changed. What Xiaoyang was going to suffer would probably be endless torture. It didn't matter if he lost his life, but if he lost his cultivation base and became a cripple, that would be the greatest blow to him. Emperor Qin felt very uncomfortable when he thought of this. All along, he had wanted to fight with this rising star. He did not expect this genius to die prematurely. Even though he wasn't from the god realm, his contributions to the god realm weren't small either. Emperor De remained silent. Even though he had already calculated the result in his heart, he was willing to believe that Xiaoyang could do it. After all, when he fought with Wei Beixin back then, he did not believe that he could win. However, he won and even severely injured Wei Beixin. If the old prime minister had not intervened, Wei Beixin's life would have been in danger. This situation had been in a deadlock for a long time. Xiaoyang was gradually showing signs of exhaustion. At this moment, he realized that his opponent was also showing signs of carelessness. Chapter 2020. The opportunity that Xiaoyang had been waiting for a long time had finally appeared at this moment. Immediately, he was overjoyed. His persistence had finally paid off, and the other party would eventually pay the price for the state of mind that he had toyed with. In the next moment, with a thought, the Thunderfire Divine sword suddenly blazed with fire, and the extremely tyrannical aura rose wildly. Immediately, the flame rushed directly to Han Jingming's body like a spiritual snake and began to coil around him at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, Han Jingming's defense suddenly disappeared, and he was entangled by the fire snake. This caused Han Jingming to be extremely shocked. What exactly was going on? He really couldn't understand why such an unforeseen event happened. Moreover, that aura was extremely terrifying. The scorching pain that came from his skin caused his mind to involuntarily tremble. He was extremely shocked. This sudden unforeseen event made Han Jingming extremely shocked. All of these changes happened too quickly, and he was caught off guard. He couldn't even figure out what had happened for such a big change to happen all of a sudden. However, Han Jingming was not a cowardly and hesitant person. After this unforeseen event, he didn't immediately defend himself. Instead, he directly punched out and hit Xiaoyang's chest, causing him to lose control and fall down. On the other hand, the Thunderfire Divine sword was kicked away by him, and it couldn't control itself at all. These actions were all completed in an instant. Han Jingming looked at the fire snake coiling around his body and was even more shocked. This was because he could tell at a glance that this was a flame that almost surpassed a high-grade heavenly fire. It was very difficult to deal with. From the beginning, Xiaoyang had hidden Xiaohua in the Thunderfire Divine sword. This was because he had already calculated clearly that the only thing he could rely on now was Xiaohua, who was infinitely close to the strength of a martial emperor. Therefore, using it as a surprise attack and as a means of victory still had a very high success rate. Since it was the means of victory in a surprise attack, Xiaoyang had to plan well and fight for enough space for Xiaohua. However, because their strength was too great, the opportunities that Xiaoyang could create were only so many. Little Fire released his energy to burn Han Jingming. At the same time, he displayed his own characteristics. He was ready to absorb Han Jingming's energy to replenish himself. Ever since Xiaohua swallowed Black Flame, he had gained black flame's swallowing ability. In Xiao Hua's eyes, Han Jingming was an incomparably delicious delicacy. He was a great tonic. Therefore, Xiao Hua was extremely excited. He wanted nothing more than to devour Han Jingming and digest him into his own power. Han Jingming was also extremely shocked when he felt his strength being devoured. He had never expected that the flame would have such an effect. It was truly terrifying. Han Jingming's heart was also incomparably shocked. No matter what, he never imagined that this little fellow's methods were actually so endless. It was likely that he had prepared his winning move here. For a moment, Han Jingming was very annoyed. Why didn't he guard against this move? While he was annoyed, an incomparably domineering power quickly surged out and began to attack the flames that were like maggots in a tarsal bone. Furthermore, Han Jingming even grabbed one end with both hands and was prepared to forcefully pull it down. The strength of a martial emperor was even more extraordinary. With a shout, he actually grabbed Xiao Hua and restrained him tightly with both hands. The current Han Jingming was no longer as calm as before. Instead, he was covered in dirt. Although the clothes on his body were magic tools, they had been burnt quite a bit. At the same time, his body had suffered different degrees of burns. Although it was not very serious, it was enough to make him feel the pain. After Xiao Yang stabilized his body, he waved his silver spear, and his eyes glowed with a ferocious light. He was now like a ferocious tiger, staring at his prey. In the next moment, Xiao Yang leaped up. With a shout, he charged towards Han Jingming. Although Xiao Hua's functionality was not as terrifying as expected, it could still be considered as holding him back temporarily. Therefore, this was a great opportunity. How could he miss it? Therefore, the opportunity would not come again once it was lost. Thousand poison, thunder, dragon roar. Xiao Yang shouted. Instantly, his spear shot out like a dragon. He even took out the martial skill he was most proficient in, preparing to use the final move to determine the outcome of this battle. Although it was still a little difficult to determine the outcome of this battle, the possibility was also very slim. However, since the opportunity had presented itself, he had to give it his all. Only by making a move would he be able to progress. If he did not make a move, he would be sitting there waiting for death. How could he let such a great opportunity slip away from his hands, just like that? Suddenly, the sound of thunder and dragon roars could be said to be endless. When Han Jingming glanced sideways, he realized that the arrogant brat had actually launched another attack. He was furious. This brat really did not know what was good for him. Did he really think that he could defeat him by taking him by surprise? This way of thinking was a little too naive. Han Jingming shouted angrily. With all his might, he directly flung Xiao Hua away. With this fling, Xiao Hua was suppressed and could not control itself at all. It could only be flung away. In the next moment, Han Jingming directly threw a punch toward Xiao Yang. He did not show any mercy. Now, Han Jingming's face was full of determination. He no longer had the joking and calmness from before. This was because he had realized that the situation had exceeded his expectations and was even a little out of his control. Therefore, he had to let everything return to square one. With this punch, an extremely powerful fist force appeared. The fist wind was extremely domineering. Everywhere it passed, the space shattered. After Xiao Yang felt that the fist force could almost smash him into pieces, he was extremely shocked. However, he was already an arrow that had been released from the bow. There was no possibility of turning back. Therefore, he could only move forward. Even though he knew that if he continued to charge forward, he would only be smashed into pieces, he could not retreat at all. Boom! Under the punch, the lightning dragon was smashed into pieces. It looked like it could not resist at all. Of course, under the lightning dragon's wear, the fist force was also quickly neutralized. The fist force bombarded Xiao Yang's body. He could not resist it and died. Chapter 2021. Xiao Yang fell powerlessly to the ground. His heart felt even more powerless. It could be said that he had planned this series of attacks for a long time, and he had done his best at every stage without any problems. But in the end, the result was not satisfactory. This made people feel very helpless. Even though he had thought of too many possibilities and grasped all the opportunities to win, in the face of absolute strength, he still seemed somewhat powerless. There was no way he could turn the situation around. After Xiao Huo was shaken off, it quickly gathered together and looked at Han Jingming covetously. It was as if it was looking at a delicacy, drooling endlessly. However, Xiao Huo did not dare to attack because he had suffered a little before. He knew very well that relying on his own strength, he was unable to defeat and eat that martial emperor powerhouse on his own. Han Jingming looked at the wounds on his body and frowned. He was in great pain. Of course, most of it was anger in his heart. Xiao Huo's power was not to be underestimated. Some of Han Jingming's skin and flesh had been burned to the point of necrosis. Even if Han Jingming used his own strength to repair them, the results were minimal. At this moment, Han Jingming realized that the high-level heavenly fire was a great threat to him. Fortunately, he had an absolute advantage in terms of strength, so he was able to salvage the situation and prevent himself from falling into a completely passive situation. Even until now, he still had lingering fear in his heart. This surprise attack also gave Han Jingming a new understanding of this young man. When Xiaoyang was about to fall into North Light City, he steadied himself and stood up. He held the silver spear and glared at Xiao Huo. The young man coughed violently a few times and spat out a lot of foam. He looked like he was in great pain. Xiaoyang's ribs were almost all broken by that punch, and his internal organs had suffered a great impact. There were even cracks on them. Furthermore, this was with the support of the technique, which was why he was barely able to endure it. Han Jingming was very surprised to see that Xiaoyang was still able to stand up. Under normal circumstances, even if Xiaoyang didn't die from his angry punch, he should have lost the ability to fight and be unable to stand up. Han Jingming also sensed that although this kid's aura had become much weaker, he was only heavily injured and not in a life-threatening situation. Moreover, it would not affect him much in the following battles. For a moment, Han Jingming was even more astonished. Could it be that this kid's body was made of steel, and he didn't feel it at all? Xiaoyang swallowed a mouthful of saliva, sweeping away the previous haze. His previous thoughts had indeed left him in despair, but he was even more aware of another concept, which was that he could not give up on himself. As long as he could stand up again, he would fight to the end and pave a bloody path for himself. Although the possibility of such a thing happening was very low, it was an extremely slim possibility. Only by giving one's all would one be able to obtain it. Han Jingming took a deep breath, calmed his thoughts, and said in a deep voice, "Looks like not only do you have outstanding talent in cultivation, but your attainments in body cultivation are even stronger than those big fools in the Thousand Thunder Realm." Xiaoyang only smiled faintly and did not explain anything. Of course, this was because the true intent of the 1,000 elephant skill that he had obtained in the realm of the gods was too overbearing. It raised his physique to an extremely terrifying level, which was why he could withstand a blow from a martial emperor. If he had only relied on the silent thunder pearl to cultivate his body, he would probably be lying on the ground now, unable to stand up. You are indeed not simple. Compared to the famous Princess Mingzhu, you are much stronger. You have taken this decisive move very well. I almost fell into your trap, Han Jingming said with a smile. Although Han Jingming was smiling, the atmosphere became even more solemn because of this. Han Jingming didn't want to see such an accident happen again. If there was another accident, he might really be shaken by this junior. Once he gave this kid hope, he might attack without any regard for his own life. When that time came, he would definitely have to pay a price. It's a pity that you are too defensive. You could even resolve this, Xiaoyang said with a bitter smile. Although this had already exceeded Xiaoyang's expectations, It also confirmed his thoughts that a martial emperor was indeed terrifying. However, at the same time, Xiaoyang also realized another point, which was that Xiao Hua's attack was enough to injure him. In this way, there was still hope. If he could nibble at him bit by bit, it would be a chance for victory. Although this was a very stupid method, as long as it was effective, it was fine to slowly grind him down. Han Jingming laughed heartily and said, "Kid, you are really sharp-tongued. Your surprise attack did not manage to take me down. Do you still have a chance after this?" Instantly, Xiaoyang's eyebrows furrowed. Next, Han Jingming would most likely be even more vigilant. Therefore, it wouldn't be an easy task to take him down. In fact, there might even be some mishaps in the process. If you don't have an even more powerful trump card than before, you will definitely lose, Han Jingming said with a smile. Of course, Han Jingming did not believe that Xiaoyang had an even more powerful ability or treasure. Therefore, the current situation had become a lot clearer. At least from Han Jingming's point of view, this was the case. Xiaoyang remained silent. In North Light City, under the command of many powerful people, many people began to move. After repeated confirmation by Mu Yang and Chu Taiyin, they discovered that the formation recorded in the ancient book was indeed one that Xiaoyang was preparing to use to build an offensive formation. At that time, they did not prepare it immediately because they thought that the resources were rare, so they were not in a hurry. Before this, the drifting cloud world was indeed calm and peaceful. However, at this moment of life and death, many people took out their own resources. As long as they could support the formation, they were not stingy. Since Arctic, Gray, Feather, Baldy, and the others had also participated in the construction of the Universal Circulation Formation, they understood a little. When building the offensive formation, it was not so difficult. In an instant, it could be said that all the cultivators in North Light City were mobilized. Many people were already in position. Sun Yukai, on the other hand, was at the center, issuing orders one after another in an orderly manner without making any mistakes. Chapter 2022. Han Jingming looked at the young man in front of him and frowned slightly. Previously, he felt that everything was under his control, so there was nothing to worry about. However, after the appearance of the high-grade heavenly fire, the situation had changed. If he continued to fight using the previous method, he would probably suffer a great loss. It was not impossible for him to pay an even greater price because of this. Therefore, he had to change his strategy. In the next moment, Han Jingming's gaze fell on the high-grade heavenly fire. Since you rely on the high-grade heavenly fire to turn the tables, if you can't use it, then the situation will naturally return to how it was before. In the blink of an eye, Han Jingming had already decided on a strategy in his heart. How to fight next was no longer a problem. Everything became clear, and there was no problem at all. Good boy, I want to see what else you can do. As Han Jingming spoke, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, looking like a sly old fox. At this moment, Xiaoyang knew that something bad was going to happen. This was because he could sense that Han Jingming had already come up with some sort of plan. Therefore, the predicament he had to face next would be even greater. In the next moment, following Han Jingming's low shout, a powerful aura suddenly rose, and a magic weapon that looked like a large bell appeared in his hand. This item is called the Inscription Bell, and it's a superior sage grade magic weapon. Han Jingming said with a smile. In an instant, Xiaoyang's expression changed. He even took out a superior sage grade magic weapon. It was clear that the old man was not going to drag this out any longer. He was probably going to keep using his killer moves. Since you're so good at jumping around, I'll cripple you first. Then, I'll let you watch as everything is destroyed. It's not bad at all. Han Jingming said with a cold smile. His eyes were filled with brutality, as if he wanted to torture Xiaoyang to death. Now that there were variables, there might be even more variables in the future. Therefore, Han Jingming had to eliminate all these variables first. Only in this way would he be able to achieve his goal in a stable manner. Xiaoyang could not help but subconsciously suck in a breath of cold air. Currently, he could already feel an extremely huge pressure. Under such a situation where he was completely suppressed and had no way to break through, he indeed felt too powerless. He originally thought that his opponent had underestimated him and that he still had a chance to win. However, now that his opponent had abandoned that thought, Xiaoyang's situation would become even more difficult. Go! Han Jingming roared in a low voice. Immediately, the sky inscription bell in his hand rose up. His hands were constantly changing as he made hand seals. Streams of energy were constantly injected into the inscription bell, and the superior sage grade magic weapon also spun at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, it was constantly emitting many strange inscriptions, which was very frightening. Xiaoyang waved the silver spear in his hand, and at the same time prepared to fight to the death. However, he still didn't know what to do next. As a result, Xiaoyang felt very helpless. How to change such a situation became a difficult problem in his heart. He did not know what to do. The inscription bell constantly emitted a tyrannical aura, and the mysterious light was constantly released. It was very dazzling. The ancient and heavy power was like a giant beast from the ancient times. It was slowly changing attributes, causing people to feel fear. As Han Jingming pointed his finger, the inscription bell immediately flew out and rushed toward Xiaohua. At this moment, Xiaoyang also understood Han Jingming's intention. He wanted to use the inscription bell to suppress Xiaohua, so that he would lose his greatest support and have no hope of turning the tables. For a moment, Xiaoyang's heart could be said to be extremely anxious. He also knew that once the other party succeeded, what he would face next might be a real desperate situation. Xiaohua was able to contribute the most substantial damage. If it was trapped, then it would naturally not be able to help him. At that time, if he faced such a powerhouse alone, how could he protect himself? Xiaohua also sensed that the power was coming for him, so he immediately began to flee. He didn't dare to hesitate at all. Seeing that the high-tier heavenly fire was being chased by the inscription bell, Han Jingming did not care anymore. At least for now, it was only a matter of time before he suppressed it. At the same time, Han Jingming already had a new plan in his heart. If he could subdue the high-tier heavenly fire, then it would be a great boost to his strength. At that time, he would have the confidence to fight against the almighties of the God realm. Xiaoyang snorted coldly and immediately took out 2 outburst pills and consumed them. All along, consuming 1 outburst pill was enough. Any more and there would be some side effects. However, now that Xiaoyang had consumed an explosive pill, it no longer had such a terrifying effect. Only by consuming 2 outburst pills could he completely recover the spiritual energy that he had lost. In addition to the outburst pill's characteristics, Xiaoyang's cultivation also increased a little. Although it was not much, it was better than nothing. As for the side effects, Xiaoyang could not care so much now. He might even face a situation where his life was in danger. How could he talk about the side effects? No matter what, he could only talk about other things if he survived. When he felt that the boy's aura had become stronger, and even his cultivation had increased a little, Han Jingming's expression changed again. At that moment, he felt that this boy was indeed interesting. His methods and trump cards could be said to be endless. Although you have temporarily increased your strength by consuming the outburst pill, so what? It's just a little bit. It won't affect the battle at all. Han Jingming said with a smile and a look of interest. He wanted to see what kind of trouble this boy could cause. The current situation was so clear. With the difference in cultivation level and suppression, it was impossible for the 2 of them to fight on equal footing. Therefore, this was a battle without any suspense. Everything he was doing was just a struggle. Xiaoyang did not think much of it. He sneered and said, "Just this point alone might be enough to shake you. Just this point alone might be enough to take your life." Chapter 2023. After hearing this, Han Jingming laughed because he felt that these words were too laughable. Just this little bit of enhancement is enough for you to step into the realm of a martial emperor? No matter how you look at it, it's unrealistic. However, in the next moment, Han Jingming's expression froze because he sensed a slight change in the atmosphere. Although Xiao Yang's realm had not risen to the realm of a martial emperor, he was infinitely close to it. This was a very strange state. He had not stepped into the realm of a martial emperor, but he was not King Wu either. Suddenly, Han Jingming also realized that Xiao Yang already had the ability to seriously injure him. If he continued to fight in a playful manner like before, it was likely that he would really have to pay the price. Therefore, Han Jingming's expression turned serious, and he no longer underestimated his opponent. He put away his playful thoughts and watched solemnly. A lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit, and the rabbit was now a jackal. Although there was still an unbridgeable gap between them, the teeth of a jackal were still very sharp. If he was not careful, it was possible for his body to be cut open. In the next moment, Xiao Yang let out a low roar and attacked again. 7 steps of the barbarian god. Now, Xiao Yang could no longer hold anything back. Therefore, this time he had to unleash all of his strength. He had to fight without any regard for his life, pouring out all of his strength in torrents. As for whether he had enough strength, he did not have to worry about that. He had 5 spiritual veins in his body and prepared many elixirs. Naturally, it was enough. Next, even if he consumed more explosive pills, he would not even frown. He would only devour them crazily. As long as he could defeat his opponent, that was enough. At this moment, Xiao Yang's exquisite body movement technique was displayed incisively and vividly. At this moment, his figure had become unpredictable and very fleeting. However, Han Jingming quickly captured the characteristics of this body movement technique. Every time he appeared, he would break through the space. With such a great momentum, it was impossible not to notice him. The barbarian god's 7 steps was only a profound grade martial skill. Although it was very overbearing and exquisite, it still had some flaws. However, for some martial skills, as long as you use them well enough, you can ignore those flaws and make them disappear. When the disciples of the Northern Light City saw that their master had once again launched an attack at this moment, everyone's heart was extremely nervous. This was because they didn't know what kind of changes this attack would bring. The core power of the flowing cloud realm had also been completely alarmed. They all left their own places and hurried towards the North Light City. However, they stopped 1,000 miles away, because from the power of the aftershocks of the battle, they had already sensed that this battle was completely out of their league. If he continued to approach, he might be killed by the aftershocks of the tyrannical battle before he could even charge over. It could be said that the entire flowing cloud realm had placed their hopes on Xiao Yang. They only hoped that the number 1 person in the flowing cloud realm, Xiao Gongzhu, could create another miracle and beat back this powerful enemy. In the next moment, Xiao Yang appeared behind Han Jingming. The silver spear in his hand directly pierced out without any mercy, revealing his killing intent. The lightning kept surging, and the lightning was as thick as an arm. It was very powerful. However, Han Jingming was unmoved. He snorted coldly, turned around, and threw out a punch, hitting the tip of the spear. Immediately, a huge force attacked. Xiao Yang almost couldn't withstand it. His hands trembled, and he staggered back, unable to control himself. However, Han Jingming's attack didn't end there. He stood up, raised his fist, and punched toward Xiao Yang's chest. Instantly, Xiao Yang's heart was filled with shock. He knew that if he was hit by this punch, the ribs in his chest would probably shatter into pieces. It was to the extent that even his internal organs would be torn apart. "Open!" Xiao Yang roared. Immediately, a treasure light appeared in front of his chest. The heavenly Qin mountain, which had been retracted, suddenly appeared, blocking in front of the 2 of them. The punch landed on the heavenly Qin mountain. Immediately, the mountain shook and countless rocks fell. Cracks appeared on the mountain like dragons. No matter how weak the heavenly Qi mountain was, it was still a lower sacred level instrument. Furthermore, it was made from the mountains of the demon clan. It wasn't inferior to some middle sacred level instruments. However, under the martial emperor's fist, it began to crack for a moment. Even Xiaoyang couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Wasn't this a little too terrifying? Boom! Another punch. More cracks appeared on the heavenly Qi mountain, especially at the places where the punch landed. It was like a spider web, cracking open inch by inch. It was a ghastly sight. It was also because the heavenly Qi mountain had blocked the 2 punches that Xiaoyang was able to stabilize his body. He immediately took a step forward and left his opponent's attack range. In the next moment, he immediately retracted the heavenly Qi mountain. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the instrument was already full of cracks. It was almost falling out of the category of sacred-level instruments. It was only 2 punches, but the damage caused was already so terrifying. If it had really landed on his body, the consequences would be unimaginable. Xiaoyang still had lingering fears. The difference in strength was too great. It was as if he was walking on a tightrope. Below him was a mountain of knives and a sea of fire. If he made a mistake, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Ha! Good lad, you can even resolve this. Then let me see how much strength you have to be able to withstand my attack. Han Jingming said mockingly. The current situation could be said to be very grim. Those who were watching the battle in North Light City couldn't help but feel despair. It was like a mountain that was difficult to shake. And they were like ants. In front of such a mountain, they were not worth mentioning and could only be crushed. The corner of Xiaoyang's mouth twitched slightly. With a casual grab, the Thunderfire Divine sword returned to his hand. I don't have much strength, but I can still hold on, Xiaoyang said with a faint smile. Han Jingming, on the other hand, smiled nonchalantly. He felt that, so what if Xiaoyang had a lot of strength? It was just an external object. Moreover, it was an external object that couldn't change the situation of the battle. In the end, it couldn't escape the fate of being smashed into pieces by his punch. Xiaoyang frowned slightly. At the same time, he began to calculate again. Although he was blind and was facing a life-and-death battle, he still needed a careful calculation to ensure a greater chance of victory. Chapter 2024 1. With a loud sound, the heavenly inscription bell suppressed Xiaohua. It no longer gave Xiaoyang a chance to share the pressure. Xiaoyang was already at a complete disadvantage. Now that Xiaohua was suppressed by the heavenly inscription bell, his situation was undoubtedly worse. If he wanted to fight back, there was no hope. This was probably the best way to kill someone's heart. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's expression became much more serious. This was because he knew very well that he would have to face such a powerful opponent alone. Although it was like this before, now it could be said that all of Xiaoyang's thoughts were cut off. It seemed that it was impossible to turn the situation around. After Han Jingming sensed that his heavenly inscription bell had trapped the advanced heavenly fire, the smile on his face became even wider. Now that the only variable had been completely dealt with, the next step was to torture and kill. In an instant, the aura on Han Jingming's body began to soar. The power and aura of a martial emperor were fully displayed. At this moment, Xiaoyang also felt a very strong pressure. Even the suppression from the realm had become stronger. Kid, I'll let you feel how terrifying the power of a martial emperor is. Han Jingming's smile became much more ferocious at this moment, like an evil spirit. Xiaoyang adapted to this tyrannical suppression in the shortest amount of time possible, and also stabilized his state of mind at the first moment. The suppression of a martial emperor was so terrifying that even in the North Light City below, many disciples with low realms were already unable to withstand it. They prostrated themselves on the ground, trembling. Even the deputy city of Baixing City, which was thousands of miles away, was affected. Although countless disciples did not prostrate themselves, they were extremely afraid. Even those who had come to watch the battle stood where they were, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. This kind of suppression that came from one's cultivation realm caused them to have no ability to resist at all. They could only silently accept it. Not to mention them, even Xiaoyang, who was already at the peak of King Wu, was more or less affected. What's more, most of the Almighties in the Flowing Cloud realm were at King Wu's level 6. They were completely incomparable. Under such pressure, although Xiaoyang had already tried his best to maintain the calmness of his mind, it was difficult for him to suppress it, and he began to become a little irritated. However, he didn't dare to act rashly because if he forced himself to fight in such a state, it would only make his fight even more chaotic and he would lose his only chance of victory. Move like thunder! Xiaoyang bellowed as he placed the silver spear on his back. Relying on the might of the divine sword, he once again launched an attack. Since he was unhappy, it wouldn't be too late for him to calm down after venting his emotions. If he continued to be entangled in his state of mind, it would instead turn into a mess. At that time, he would likely be faced with indecision and would no longer have the purest fighting spirit. Xiaoyang was still very clear on which was more important. He had no choice but to do so. Seeing Xiaoyang rushing over with his sword again, Han Jingming felt like a cornered dog jumping over a wall. The smile on his face became even wider. Everything was going according to his plan, and this was the best way to develop. Since everything was destined, then he needed to enjoy this process. He even needed to make it even more wonderful and increase his own pleasure. Xiaoyang's sword slashed out, and his entire body was instantly filled with lightning. The incomparably violent power was like the might of the heavens, inviolable. At this moment, even the suppression in terms of cultivation level had been cut off. The power of lightning had always been so terrifying. Moreover, Xiaoyang had now opened all 5 spiritual meridians. The terrifying power was also unimaginable. Han Jingming raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the little fellow charging over with wild and violent thunderbolts. Soon after, he let out a low cry and raised his fist. Han Jingming stopped his movement the moment he made that move. However, waves of power continued to gather in his fist like a vortex. It was enough to shock anyone who saw it. In the 3,000 small realms, there were only a handful of people who could become a martial emperor. However, once one could step into this realm, he would be favored by the 3,000 small realms. It would be a piece of cake for him to be able to achieve the power of heaven and earth. Everything seemed very normal. It was as if an ordinary old man had raised his fist. However, the power and destructive power it emitted was different. It could even be said that it was an existence that was difficult to estimate. At the very least, under this punch, although it was not fully formed, it was enough to destroy a relatively large city and turn it into ruins. Kong Hui Fist! Han Jingming let out a low growl and punched out. Immediately, the fist force also came crashing down. The fist was so big that it was like a small mountain. The fist force was so strong that it rumbled continuously. The fist force was so strong that it shattered the space. Faced with such a powerful punch, Xiaoyang still did not retreat. He wanted to see how strong the martial skill of a martial emperor was. With his ability, would he be able to block it? Instantly, the lightning became even more violent. The power within Xiaoyang's body continued to pour into the divine sword. Streaks of sword qi poured out like a torrential downpour. When the sword qi came into contact with the fist force, it was shattered into pieces without any resistance. This was the martial skill of a martial emperor. Although it looked like a casual attack, it had already merged with the great way of heaven and earth. It was filled with endless killing intent, and its power was unparalleled. It sent chills down one's spine. Xiaoyang still did not retreat. He held the divine sword quietly and continued to charge forward. The sound of the sword qi shattering was heard continuously. It was very ear-piercing. Although the fist force looked invincible, its radiance began to dim under the exhaustion of the sword qi. Boom! This punch could be said to have landed squarely on Xiao Yang's chest. Immediately, he lost control of his body and fell down like a comet. The fist force was also shattered by the sword qi. Immediately, Han Jingming's expression changed drastically. He did not expect this young man to break his martial skill with all his strength, and the reason why Xiao Yang fell was because of the rebounding force. Chapter 2025. At this moment, Han Jingming's face was no longer calm. He felt that everything was a little abnormal. He had used at least 80% of his strength in this attack, but this little guy could still block it. Could it be that he was really a monster? How could he do this? At this moment, Han Jingming's heart was filled with many doubts. No matter how monstrous or how talented this guy was, he was only at the peak of King Wu's realm. Compared to their martial royal realm, there was still a huge gap. However, no matter how he looked at it now, the energy and tenacity that King Wu could not display was not something that could be displayed. Therefore, Han Jingming really did not understand why the situation had turned out like this. He was extremely depressed in his heart. Looks like this kid must have obtained some great opportunity in the tomb of the God of Sin. That's why he's like this. Otherwise, with the arrogance of the God of Sin, how could they lower themselves to form an alliance with him? Han Jingming muttered in his heart. There was a slight change in his expression. He was very clear that he could no longer judge his opponent based on King Wu's realm. Otherwise, he would definitely suffer a great loss. If he could transfer the opportunity that King Wu had obtained in the tomb of the God of Sin to himself, would it be possible for him to reach a higher level of enlightenment? At that time, why would he need to be afraid of being hunted down by the God of Sin? After thinking about this, Han Jingming's heart became more and more excited. This was because what he saw in his eyes was hope and endless possibilities. If it was not for the many opportunities that he had obtained, how could a mere peak of King Wu possibly block the attack of a martial royal realm expert like him? Xiao Yang swung the divine sword in his hand. Immediately, wisps of flame aura were released continuously. Now he gradually gained some confidence in his heart. With the support of these many spells, it was not impossible for him to be a little bit sharper. If there were more variables, he might even be able to kill his opponent. As he thought about these questions, his heart had already become determined. He also knew how he should achieve victory next. It was a fight to the death, but there was finesse in it. Good lad, you are actually unscathed after taking a punch from me. I want to see how tough your skin is, Han Jingming said as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Although Xiao Yang's defense was amazing, in Han Jingming's eyes he was just a punching bag with a little more resistance. Even if you can take a beating, there is still a limit. As long as this limit was exceeded, everything would become simple. The corner of Xiao Yang's lips curled up and he said, "Try it and you will know." After he finished speaking, Xiao Yang's spirit shook. Suddenly, he looked energetic again, as if he had not suffered the slightest setback. This was Xiao Yang. Even when faced with a hopeless situation, he would not be afraid. Instead, he would fight bravely until he defeated the enemy. Looking at this young man full of vigor, Han Jingming suddenly felt that his great-great-grandson might have lost because he lacked this vigor. Han Fenglu was also high-spirited back then. However, it seemed that ever since he started carrying out that plan, he had become a little lethargic because he had too many worries. Being mature was a good thing, but he was not like a teenager at all. In the end, Han Jingming could only turn this into a sigh, because everything was in the past and the person was gone. Even if he found the problem now, what was the point? It could even be said that it was useless, and the culprit who caused all this was right in front of him. It could be said that if it was not for this matter, Han Jingming would be very happy to form a good relationship with this young man. After all, once this person grew up, he would be immeasurable. In the future, he might even protect the Greenlee world because of this good relationship. However, it could be said that the world made fools of people. Everything would not go as smoothly as expected. Therefore, The situation was already decided. He could only keep his admiration for him in his heart. Then I'll give it a try. Han Jingming smiled bitterly, thinking of some unpleasant things. Han Jingming's heart was filled with bitterness. His bitterness was mixed with endless anger and fury. In an instant, the atmosphere became heavy once again. The two people's auras clashed once more. They could be described as tit for tat, neither giving way to the other. In a battle of auras, Xiaoyang had always been the weaker one. However, in terms of presence, he did not slack off at all. In fact, he was even slightly stronger. After all, he was completely suppressed. If he lost, if his presence was still completely suppressed, he would have no chance of winning at all. As a result, Xiaoyang knew this very well and did his best to maintain this balance. Although Xiaoyang and Han Jingming didn't have any deep enmity between them, due to Han Fenglu and Xiaoyang's appearance in the flowing cloud realm, it could be said that the two of them had a blood feud. "Kneel down before me." Han Jingming growled and immediately pressed his palm down rapidly. Suddenly, a tyrannical pressure and aura appeared in the sky. A huge palm fell from the sky like a punishment from the heavens. With endless divine might, it pressed down on the seemingly insignificant young man. Wherever the palm print passed, there were continuous explosions. The space of the 3,000 small worlds was very fragile. Therefore, under the anger of a martial emperor, it could not withstand it. Anyone who had reached the martial emperor realm could break through the void and ascend to the middle world. However, this group of old men also chose not to ascend to the middle world because they were concerned about the status of their forces in the 3,000 small worlds. Xiaoyang felt that his aura had been completely locked down. In fact, every part of his body was under great pressure. He tried to move, but in exchange his body trembled continuously. This pressure could be said to be all of Han Jingming's power. What he wanted was to use his cultivation level to directly crush Lin Fan. The suppression from the difference in cultivation level made even a heaven-defying existence like Xiaoyang feel very helpless. After all, the higher the cultivation level, the greater the difference in cultivation level. However, how could Xiaoyang be willing to be suppressed just like that? If he was really suppressed, then he would be like a fish on a chopping board waiting to be slaughtered. With a roar, Xiaoyang did not care about the immense pain and pressure his body was enduring. He was even about to break apart. He still slashed out with his sword. At that moment, in the North Light City, the spiritual energy suddenly flourished and flames soared into the sky. Chapter 2026. The Northern Light City suddenly emitted a halo which looked extremely terrifying. The spiritual power was also converging at an extremely fast speed. Suddenly, it had already become a very powerful aura, causing people to be astonished. As far as the eye could see, there were countless ripples intertwining with each other. They were all weaved by spiritual energy, and they were like a protective net. If they wanted to attack the Northern Light City, then they would have to first expel the spiritual energy before they could succeed. At the same time, Mu Yang slowly rose from the North Light City. He held the Order of Vermilion in his hand. Under the support of many powers, he looked extremely mighty. After a short period of selection and arrangement, the North Light City's formation was completed. It could be said that when facing a powerful enemy, as long as the cultivators of the flowing cloud realm were in the North Light City, they could be said to be working together. Their wills were like an impregnable fortress. Everyone was very clear that when facing such a powerful enemy, this was the only way they could have a chance of winning. After all, the enemy was a martial emperor powerhouse. How terrifying was that? If they could not work together, this prosperity would probably become a fleeting cloud. In the end, it could be said that they would be worse than before. Therefore, no one had a choice. They had to work together. Only in this way would they be able to carve out a path of survival. In such a situation, they could only win and not lose. Once they lost, it would be a crushing defeat. They might even be unable to recover from this setback. Perhaps in the next tens of thousands of years, they would be powerless. At that time, they would probably be humiliated by the surrounding worlds. No one wanted to see that day again. Therefore, everyone was willing to contribute their own strength. All the cultivators of King Wu's realm and above stood in the formation and contributed all their strength into this formation. Some of the higher realms, such as the old master Xiao and the others, even took the outburst pill to forcefully increase their realms and strength. This was to make the formation more powerful and give them more chances. Even if it was just a little bit, it would be enough. Outside the North Light City, countless cultivators were praying in their hearts. They hoped that Xiaoyang could defeat this powerful opponent. Their master could create miracles. The current Xiaoyang could be said to be popular. Almost everyone in the flowing cloud field had placed their hopes on him. The contributions of the first ruler in the history of the flowing cloud world could not be denied. Furthermore, everyone admired him very much and even worshipped him like a god. Mu Yang held the order of vermilion flame in his hand and slowly rose into the air. At this moment, his expression had become much more serious. As the core of the heavenly cycle sequencing formation, Mu Yang was well aware of the burden on his shoulders. What he wanted to do was to use the power of the entire Northern Light City to help Xiaoyang. They wanted to fight side by side and defeat this powerful enemy. Xiaoyang had personally set up the sky circulation array, so he naturally knew what Mu Yang and the others were doing. At the same time, he was extremely shocked. These people's abilities could not be underestimated. They were actually able to use more than half of the sky circulation array's power. At the same time, Xiaoyang did not have the time to feel heartache. Perhaps after this battle, the sky circulation array's vitality would be greatly damaged. Perhaps its lifespan would also decrease because of this. However, this was not the time to feel heartache. How to survive this disaster was the most important thing. As such, he did not stop them from doing what they were doing. After Mu Yang had consumed the outburst pill and had the support of the sky circulation array, his aura was now so powerful that it was not inferior to any peak rank 9 existence. In fact, the current him had faintly surpassed the peak and reached an extremely terrifying level. With the support of this array, his strength was close to that of a martial king. However, at this moment, Mu Yang was still unable to adapt and control this power perfectly. This was where the pressure came from. All of a sudden, Han Jingming's eyebrows involuntarily changed. He looked at the city that was filled with spiritual energy. He could not help but feel shocked and incredulous that such a change had occurred. This was just a remote and desolate place. How could they set up such a powerful array? Han Jingming's gaze and attitude also changed because of this. Although he was surprised that the flowing cloud realm had shown so many things, it was still within his expectations. After all, how could a small realm that could ally with the god realm be simple? Of course. What shocked Han Jingming even more was his opponent. This kid was actually able to perfectly integrate the resources he had obtained from other realms into his own. This was truly rare. With Mu Yang sharing the pressure, Xiaoyang immediately felt the pressure on him lessen. In the next moment, he roared and unleashed all of his strength, blocking the pressure completely. Following this, Xiaoyang quickly consumed 2 outburst pills to maintain his strength. Xiaoyang pointed his sword at the sky, looking quite domineering. Haha, is this considered a cornered beast jumping over a wall? In this way, do you really think you can defeat me? Han Jingming laughed wildly as he spoke. In Han Jingming's eyes, although the number 2 person in the flowing cloud realm had the support of the array, his strength was only at the peak of King Wu's strength. In fact, he could not even compare to Xiaoyang. After all, he was not a martial emperor. How could he be mentioned in the same breath as Han Jingming, or even threaten his position? The gap between realms was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2 with the support of many powers. As he said this, Han Jingming increased the strength of his hands and continued to suppress Xiaoyang. At this very moment, Xiaoyang was completely fearless. coupled with the fact that the entire drifting cloud world was fighting this battle for him. How could he be afraid of the slightest thing and not display 120% of his strength? Furthermore, Xiaoyang was very clear that the people of the flowing cloud world were behind him. Whether he would prosper in the future or not, that was something that countless people were looking forward to. How could he fall? For the sake of the greater good, he naturally could not give up and compromise. Furthermore, he had to defeat his opponent. Only then could he live up to the expectations of the entire flowing cloud realm and his own heart. That's why he stabbed his sword into the sky. He wanted to break your pressure so that your pressure on your cultivation level would be useless. Chapter 2027. Xiaoyang soared into the sky and poured all of his power into the sword in his hand. In an instant, the sword light shone brightly, giving off an unstoppable momentum. It was incredibly valiant. Countless strands of sword qi poured out in a frenzy at that moment. It was like a flood that had broken through a dam, unstoppable. This was Xiaoyang. Even though he was in a desperate situation and knew that he had no chance of winning, he would not give up. This was especially so in a situation where there was no way to retreat. He would charge with all his might and carve out a path of blood. Countless strands of power exploded or were crushed around him, but he did not seem to feel them at all. He only cared about his sword pointing forward, and he continued to unleash power. He wanted to fight it out with you, to see whether you were young and rash or old and domineering. What bravado! Han Jingming could not help but praise when he saw this. He felt that this was too rare. In fact, he even felt a little admiration for him. Of course, in Han Jingming's eyes, these people were basically lunatics. If they were at the same cultivation level, it would be an extremely unwise choice to provoke them. Fortunately, he was only holding back. He was a martial emperor expert, so he naturally had nothing to worry about. The huge difference in strength allowed him to sit back and relax. No matter how crazy you were, you would only be a clown or a joke to make him happier. There was no meaning to it. Mu Yang, who was hovering above Borealis City, saw that Xiaoyang was under immense pressure and immediately frowned. He knew very well that he could not help much. That pressure was only because he had the protection of the heavenly cycle orderly array that he hadn't been targeted. However, he could not help share the pressure that Xiaoyang was being targeted. Mu Yang was currently under immense pressure, mostly from the flowing cloud world and his own heart. In order to contribute, almost all of the elites in the flowing cloud world had gathered together and contributed their cultivation and strength to Mu Yang. What he wanted was to be able to help Xiaoyang and defeat the enemy. However, Mu Yang had yet to familiarize himself with this powerful energy. In fact, it felt very foreign to him and he couldn't control it as he wished. Therefore, he was very anxious now and wanted to change. However, the more anxious he was, the more chaotic he became. There was simply no way to change this predicament. When Sun Yukai and the others saw that Mu Yang still hadn't made a move, they began to panic. Every time the heavenly circulation formation was activated, it would consume countless resources. Moreover, how much pressure was Xiaoyang facing alone? However, no one said anything because no matter who was in that position, they would be facing tremendous pressure. They might even be out of breath. Therefore, the only thing they could do now was to contribute as much as they could to support the heavenly cycle sequence formation and provide it with enough resources so that they would have the ability to fight against the enemy. Very quickly, Mu Yang's eyes lit up as he stared at his opponent. He knew very well that he didn't have much time to familiarize himself with this energy, so he had to make a move. Moreover, only when he made a move would he know how terrifying this energy was and be able to control it. Immediately, Mu Yang's hands began to form seals. The vermilion token slowly rose up and exploded with an extremely powerful flame aura. Together with the Thunderfire Divine Sword, the two types of energy could be said to be intertwined. Immediately, the outside of the Northern Light City became as hot as a sea of fire. Heat waves came one after another, and it was extremely terrifying. Even the birds that passed by within 1,000 miles were roasted dry and turned into dried corpses. Kill! Mu Yang roared and pointed his finger at the vermilion token. Immediately, countless amounts of energy poured into it. The vermilion token suddenly trembled and let out a clear bird's cry. It was very pleasing to the ear. In the next moment, a huge bird covered in flames flew out from the vermilion token. It spread its wings and soared high into the sky like an eagle. The eagle continued to grow in size, and its aura became even more terrifying. Everywhere it passed, the heat would roll out and could not be ignored. In fact, even the spiritual energy was incinerated by the heat waves. From this, it could be seen how powerful the Firebird was. When he sensed the sudden attack of the powerful energy, Han Jingming could not help but frown slightly. He looked at Mu Yang in disbelief. Mu Yang was only at the peak of the 9th level. With the support of that strange formation, he was able to explode with such terrifying power. This made Mu Yang feel a little strange. However, his perception was very strong, and he knew very well that there was no way he would be mistaken. In that instant, Han Jingming did not dare to be careless. His entire person became a lot more serious. He knew that he was facing a group of desperados. If he made the slightest mistake, he might be at a disadvantage. In this remote world, it could be said that the barren hills and turbulent rivers gave birth to unruly people. Moreover, the people here were very brave. In the next moment, Han Jingming began to form hand seals. With a roar, he punched out towards the Firebird. Immediately, a huge illusory fist appeared. It carried with it a boundless might, as if it was going to destroy everything. Boom! The fist energy slammed into the Firebird. Immediately, the flames were about to disperse. However, with the support of the vermilion token, the Firebird did not explode. However, its power was constantly being reduced. The two forces continued to clash and clash. Right now, it was a contest of strength. Suddenly, the fist energy was exhausted. However, the Firebird did not disappear and continued to charge forward. In that instant, Han Jingming's heart was filled with shock. Was this formation really that terrifying? After seeing this scene, not to mention Mu Yang, even the people in Borealis City who were watching this scene were shocked. It could be said that this was the first time in this battle that they had the upper hand. This made them feel that it was a little unreal. It was difficult for them to understand what was going on. However, this was definitely good news for them. It was an opportunity for them to win. Immediately, even Mu Yang was shocked. He did not understand what was going on. Chapter 2028. Han Jingming frowned slightly when he saw the eagle charging towards him. Soon after, he let out a cold snort. He extended his hand and directly grabbed it. With a little force, the Firebird was directly turned into countless sparks and was completely destroyed. It's just a weak finish. Did you really think it was an attack from a martial emperor? Han Jingming looked coldly at him and scolded. Many people felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. When they saw the eagle and Firebird being invincible, they thought it was a ray of hope and that it was time to turn the tables. However, no one could have imagined that it would vanish into nothingness with just a light grasp of someone else's hand. Wasn't the gap in strength a little too great and too terrifying? Even Mu Yang could not help but feel dejected. However, when he saw the old man casually shake his hand, the corners of his lips curled up. The vermilion token was an upper sage weapon. Furthermore, it was supported by the heavenly cycle order formation. How could the attack from it be so simple? Even if Han Jingming destroyed the Firebird with a single squeeze, his hand would have been burned. That was why he had made such a move. If that was the case, all these problems gradually made sense. Han Jingming was not an invincible existence. He also had his weaknesses. Since the flames could burn him, he might as well persevere and try burning him until he was unrecognizable. After all, so what if he was a martial emperor? However, there was nothing behind him. Behind Mu Yang, on the other hand, was the heavenly cycle order formation and the drifting cloud realm. Since he could not win against him in terms of explosive power, he might as well slowly wear him down until he was nothing. After making up his mind, Muyang immediately regained his confidence. Of course, it was mostly because he knew what he had to do. That was why he was so determined. If he did not have hope, he would still be in a state of confusion and would not know what to do. However, things were different now. Since there was even the slightest chance of victory, he would definitely not let it slip from his hands. In the blink of an eye, Muyang roared. Immediately, the heavenly cycle formation beneath his feet shone brightly as boundless energy gathered towards him. This time, Zhu Yanling exuded an even more tyrannical radiance. Streams of flame aura seemed as if they were about to burn the entire world. Boom! Xiaoyang slashed out and broke through Han Jingming's suppression. He held the divine sword in front of his chest and looked at him with narrowed eyes. Originally, without Fiery's help, Xiaoyang was still uncertain in his heart. He felt that the chances were only 1 in 10,000. However, now that he had the assistance of the entire drifting cloud world, it wasn't as if he didn't have a chance. Now his confidence had become even stronger because of this. If he still couldn't win when everyone was united, he would really let them down. Brat, I didn't expect you to be able to break free from my suppression so quickly. However, what's the use of that? Han Jingming sneered and said, from Han Jingming's point of view, Xiaoyang had forcefully broken free from his suppression and most likely had used up most of his energy by now. Now he was an arrow at the end of its flight and could not use much of his strength at all. Now, Xiaoyang was indeed facing such a difficult problem. However, he did not panic at all. With a flip of his hand, he swallowed another 2 power explosion pills. Now he swallowed the power explosion pills as if they were jelly beans. He did not care about the aftereffects. Now the power explosion pills could not increase Xiaoyang's strength by much. However, they could also reduce the damage that they could cause. However, the power explosion pills were not completely useless. They could help Xiaoyang quickly recover his spiritual energy. It could be said that as long as Xiaoyang was willing, he would be able to have an endless supply of spiritual energy. However, doing so would be like draining the pond to catch all the fish. It could easily hurt his foundation. However, now that survival was a problem, why would he think about his foundation? From my point of view, you're just SOSO. I'm afraid that among the few martial emperors, you're the weakest. As Xiaoyang spoke, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Following Han Jingming's several big moves, his flaws had now become more apparent. It seemed that he had been seriously injured during the battle in the Greenly world. Moreover, his injuries had not healed yet. Perhaps that was the key to victory. So what if I'm the weakest? I'm also a martial emperor. I'm not someone that King Wu ants like you can covet. Han Jingming snorted coldly and shouted. From Han Jingming's point of view, he was just fooling around with them. Once he decided to kill them, they would not be able to resist at all. However, Han Jingming did not realize that he had almost used his full strength several times just now, but he was unable to suppress it. Let's give it a try then. After Xiaoyang finished speaking, he waved the divine sword in his hand. Instantly, the lightning aura disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a monstrous flame that continued to burn fiercely. It was an extremely terrifying sight. At that moment, the Thunderfire Divine Sword and Zhu Yanling's aura seemed to be compatible. In the next moment, Xiaoyang moved and thrust his sword forward. Since the reinforcements from the realm of gods could not wait and the North Light City's trump card had been exposed, it was necessary to end the battle quickly. Therefore, he chose to take the initiative to attack. If he had been passive all this while, he would be in a situation where he could not fight back. By then, there would be no hope for him to turn the tables. Now that he had an additional helping hand, the situation would change and allow him to do so. You're just courting death. Han Jingming snorted coldly and said disdainfully. Soon after, Han Jingming's sleeves began to dance rapidly. He looked rather imposing, as if he was unshakable. Plunder like fire! Xiao Yang charged forward, not caring about how much resistance he would face. He did not hesitate to thrust his sword forward. On the other side, Mu Yang immediately activated the Zhu Yanling and launched his own attack. He was prepared to help Xiao Yang and create an opportunity for him. In fact, the two of them were on par with each other. One of them had 5 heaven-defying spiritual veins, while the other had the support of a pseudo-spiritual vein and the universal circulation formation. Their attacks were not to be underestimated. The only flaw was that Mu Yang was not familiar with them. Instantly, the two of them attacked at the same time. Han Jingming did not panic and continued to deal with them calmly. Chapter 2029. To Han Jingming, no matter how strong the two of them were, they were still King Wu's level. In front of him, a martial emperor, they were still like ants. They could not shake his position at all. They could not possibly have the ability to kill him. Therefore, Han Jingming could be said to be fearless right now. That was why he was so calm and not worried in the slightest. In this battle, he had the absolute advantage. If he still had to be timid and restrained under such circumstances, it would really be a disgrace to the name of the martial emperor realm. Ever since Han Jingming had become a martial emperor, he had become arrogant. At least, to him, there was almost no one in the 3,000 small worlds that could shake him. Even the God realm was only slightly afraid. In the Greenlee world, if the two martial emperors had not joined forces to fight him, how could he have ended up in such a sorry state? If it was a one-on-one battle, Han Jingming did not think that he was weaker than the martial emperor. At the very least, they were evenly matched. Although his injuries had not healed, he was not someone that ants could covet. In the next moment, Han Jingming growled and pressed down with his hand, slapping down on Northlight City. This palm still appeared to be light and soft. However, it already contained the power of the world. It was extremely terrifying. In an instant, the layers of heat waves were unable to resist this palm. It was like a sword cutting through a river. A huge gap quickly appeared. The power of this palm was so terrifying that it was difficult to match it. Now, Han Jingming had realized that even though he was invincible in this place, he could not continue to pay the price. Although the person standing in the end would definitely be him, he did not want his body to suffer any more injuries. As for Northlight City, it was a completely different place. Moreover, Mu Yang was completely trapped in the formation. It was the best place to target. As for Xiao Yang, he was too agile. If Han Jingming used too much force, he might even kill him. If he destroyed Northlight City, which he had worked so hard for in his lifetime, it would be equivalent to destroying all his efforts. At that time, he would probably be in endless pain and frustration. Mu Yang seemed to have sensed Han Jingming's thoughts and immediately changed his attack. He knew that if he couldn't block this attack, the formation would suffer some kind of impact, causing the circulation to be obstructed. Then his ability would be greatly reduced. Therefore, he had to be careful when dealing with them. Zhu Yanling's gaze swept across the room, and Mu Yang steeled his heart. Instantly, his expression became much more serious. At the same time, countless spiritual energies in the Northern Light City gathered together and appeared in front of him as if they had materialized. As Mu Yang retracted his hand, the spiritual energy turned into a huge wall that stood there, seemingly unshakable. Rumble! When this palm landed on the spirit chi wall, it immediately began to tremble as if it was about to shatter. However, Mu Yang's expression did not change at all. He was still frantically drawing out the power of the spirit formation to resist. Behind Mu Yang, there was not only the sky circulation formation, but also the support of all the top cultivators in the drifting cloud realm. Every cultivator who contributed didn't just take the outburst pill, they also swallowed a lot of pills that could quickly restore their spiritual power. At the very least, in the next hour, their power would be almost endless, and there would be no signs of it drying up. How generous! Seeing this, the corner of Han Jingming's mouth twitched. He was shocked. If he had the support of such a powerful formation back in the Greenlee realm, even if there were two almighty martial emperors, so what? As long as he stood there, he would be able to hold back 10,000 enemies. How could he not be envious of such extravagance? Han Jingming also felt a little lucky in his heart, because the person holding the upper saint-level instrument was obviously not very familiar with this formation, so he could not display all of its power. It was like a child holding a treasure and could only attack it wildly, unable to display the subtleties of it. Mu Yang clenched his teeth and held on. At the same time, he sent a thought into the vermilion token. While defending, he was also preparing for the next attack. It could be said that Mu Yang's defense this time was forced. He had no choice but to do so. Only by attacking could he fight for a chance of survival. At this moment, Xiaoyang was like a rocket that could not be stopped. In the blink of an eye, he was already there. The spiritual energy of the divine sword in his hand poured out continuously, showing off in front of an expert. Han Jingming had neglected Mu Yang because he was attacking the Northern Light City. He did not expect Mu Yang to be right in front of him. He sneered disdainfully and sent out a palm strike. Suddenly, a powerful force surged out like a tidal wave, making it impossible for anyone to resist. The spiritual energy of the sword could not be blocked. Some of them even flew back and stabbed into Xiao Yang's body. It was obvious how terrifying the power of this palm strike was. However, Xiao Yang allowed the spiritual energy of the sword to pierce into his body. He was still indifferent and continued to move forward. The divine sword in his hand was incomparably firm. It was as if he had no intention of retreating. He continued to move forward bravely. The tip of the sword continued to move forward. It could be said that it was unstoppable and was about to reach him. In the blink of an eye, Han Jingming's expression changed once again. Now he was really a little stunned. Such a change was a little surprising. Could it be that this kid really had a body of steel? He knew that it was impossible, but he still wanted to go against the flow. Did he want to be smashed to pieces? Han Jingming didn't know what this fugitive was thinking. But since things had already come to this point, if he continued to play with this mentality, he might really fail miserably at such an easy task. Therefore, he was determined not to allow this to happen. With a shout, he sent out another palm strike. As for what would happen to Mu Yang under this palm strike, it was hard to say. However, Xiaoyang was not afraid at all. When he felt an even more terrifying attack coming, his expression was filled with determination. It was as if he was a hero who was going to die bravely. Everything seemed so sudden and helpless. It was extremely tragic. When the palm strike was completely worn down, the Zhu Yanling swept out. Chapter 2030. Mu Yang began to pour all of his power into the vermilion token. At this moment, all of the techniques he had learned were completely fused together. All of a sudden, he had some new insights. With a shout, the vermilion token in his hand danced quickly, like a ball of fire dancing in the air. The fire could be said to have soared into the sky, and the scorching aura turned into a heat wave that swept out. However, this time it was even more powerful than before. In this battle that surpassed his cultivation level and was supported by a powerful formation, Mu Yang had some new insights in his heart. At this moment, some of the things that were originally unclear became clear. It could be said that the sharpening of a battle was the fastest. This was because this was a double-edged sword. Either one would reach a higher level because of this, or one would lose one's life here. The more dangerous the battle, the easier it was for one to have a flash of inspiration in a desperate situation. They would be able to understand what was going on and where the mysteries were. Raging dragon world incineration. Mu Yang roared. Immediately, the vermilion token in his hand shot out an endless stream of flames. In the blink of an eye, the flames turned into a fire dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It looked extremely ferocious and unstoppable. The fire dragon continued to spiral forward, and its momentum became more and more violent. The flames roared like a dragon's roar. The moment the cultivators in the North Light City saw the fire dragon appear, they were all shocked. Since they were all in the array, they could naturally feel it. They knew how much spiritual energy was contained in this attack and how terrifying it was. When the dangerous aura appeared, Han Jingming was even more surprised. For a moment, he was also a little stunned. This small drifting cloud realm could be said to be a remote and dilapidated place. How could there be a second person so powerful in such a short period of time? Han Jingming did not understand, but the dangerous aura made him feel a little apprehensive. This was because the fire dragon could indeed shake him. That was why it was like this. After coming to the drifting cloud realm, Han Jingming had discovered too many things that did not make sense. At the very least, everything in front of him felt very strange and unreal. But at the same time, there was nothing he could do, because everything was reality. Thinking back to his own Greenly realm, it could be said that there were many talented people, and each of them was outstanding beyond compare. However, there were very few people who could stand out and shoulder the burden at such a critical moment. In fact, it was even inferior to this unrated small world. Han Jingming could not deal with the threat of the fire dragon with all his strength, because Xiaoyang was only 3 feet away from him. Under the second palm strike, Xiaoyang actually managed to forcefully withstand it, and the sword in his hand continued to move forward. "You're courting death." Han Jingming was extremely shocked and furious because this little fellow was the most stubborn existence he had ever seen. Under such circumstances, he actually continued. Could it be that he really didn't want to live anymore? Xiaoyang had considered retreating, but when Muyang had attacked, he had understood that he had to create an opportunity for himself. Since an opportunity had appeared, he naturally had to control it tightly in his hands and not let it slip away. His thinking was that simple. Xiaoyang knew very well that his moves were completely worn out. In fact, in many places his luck had run out. There was no point in continuing. However, things were different now. As long as he had enough time and space, everything could be calculated. Han Jingming turned his palm into a fist and roared in anger. He punched downwards, and his expression became extremely ferocious. Against such a fugitive, Han Jingming knew very well that he had to beat him down with one punch. He also had to end this quickly and blast this kid away. Otherwise, when the fire dragon arrived, how would he have enough time to block it? Even though he wouldn't die, the price he would have to pay was enough to make his heart ache. At that moment, Han Jingming's body shone with the light of a treasure. At that moment, he put away his mentality of bullying the weak and prepared to give it his all. Everything had gone beyond his expectations. Therefore, Han Jingming felt that if he continued fooling around, it would be bad for him. Faced with such a ferocious punch, Xiaoyang still didn't retreat. His eyes were filled with determination, as if he was determined to die. Lunatic! Han Jingming cursed in his heart. Suddenly he increased his strength. Xiaoyang didn't defend himself at all. He still stabbed out with his sword, aiming for Han Jingming's neck. It could be said that he was full of murderous intent. The aura of the flames kept getting closer and closer. Han Jingming's fist was as fast as lightning. Boom! With this punch, Han Jingming directly bombarded Xiaoyang's chest. Instantly, the sound of bones breaking was extremely crisp. At the same time, the powerful force of the punch continuously rushed into Xiaoyang's body through his skin. It was as if this punch was going to smash his internal organs, limbs, and bones into powder. Now that Han Jingming was in such a dangerous situation, he gradually lost his rationality and erupted with his own instincts. The more he was in such a situation, the more he naturally didn't hold back in order to protect himself. When Han Jingming saw the smile on the young man's face, he was even more shocked and furious. Is he really crazy? Suddenly, the martial emperor powerhouse felt a pain in his throat. The blade of the sword slashed across his throat. Although it wasn't deep, it still caused a few splashes of blood. Although the power of this sword could only cause a superficial wound, for Xiaoyang it was already a breakthrough. It wasn't like before, where everything he did was in vain and he didn't even manage to touch the other person's sleeve. At that moment, Han Jingming's eyes revealed a murderous intent. He knew that he had underestimated his opponent, but he didn't expect this kid to be crazy to this extent. Was it as simple as slashing his throat, even at the cost of his own life? Han Jingming didn't know, but the force of his punch was still exploding. In the next moment, Xiao Yang's body was like a meteorite as he plummeted downwards. In the end, he was unable to continue resisting this enormous force. At the same time, the fire dragon also arrived. The huge force was less than 3 feet away from the martial emperor powerhouse. Chapter 2031. As he watched the fire dragon charge towards him, Han Jingming used most of his strength to push back Xiao Yang. Now, he was starting to run out of strength. However, he was a martial emperor after all. Furthermore, he had fought countless battles in his life. How could he be defeated so easily? Therefore, he quickly retreated. At the same time, the protective artifacts on his body surged out wildly. The mysterious light shone so brightly that it was almost impossible to see where he was. The fire dragon was not slow either. In the blink of an eye, it had surrounded Han Jingming, leaving him no room to retreat. At this moment, all the cultivators in the drifting cloud realm could not help but hold their breaths when they saw the scene. Everyone's hearts were filled with nervousness and anticipation, because in their eyes, this was an opportunity to win. Everyone hoped that this would be the final attack, the fatal attack. Mu Yang's expression also became very serious. He stood weakly on the spot, but he was still very nervous. This raging dragon, Burns the world, had used up all the energy in his body. Although he had an endless supply of energy behind him, he still needed a certain amount of time to recover. After the fire dragon had trapped Han Jingming, it began to attack at an extremely fast speed. It continued to attack and kill. Under the endless power of the fire dragon, the mysterious light gradually began to dim. With the support of so many forces, the power of this move was already at its strongest. Its power could be said to be beyond the normal range. At the very least, this terrifying destructive power was not something that a 9th-level greater success could produce. In fact, even King Wu would find it difficult to achieve this at his peak. Han Jingming guarded his heart. After recovering some of his strength, he threw out punches. He looked like an angry god, unstoppable. The scorching aura made him feel extremely uncomfortable. His skin had already been injured, and countless Dharma artifacts were being shattered at this moment, causing him to feel extremely distressed. He never thought that the small, drifting cloud realm would have such terrifying cohesion. Furthermore, when these people did not care about their lives, they were truly like madmen. There was no rationality to speak of. Boom! At this time, Xiao Yang fell to the ground and directly smashed a deep hole. If water was poured in, this place could become a lake. For a moment, no one paid any attention to the silent Xiao Yang. Everyone's attention was focused on the invader. In a short moment, fist energy kept coming out of the fire dragon's body. Immediately, everyone was dumbfounded. Just when they thought it was a sure-kill move, the martial emperor suddenly launched a counterattack. It seemed like he was going to destroy the fire dragon. Many people were on the verge of despair at this moment. They felt that they had already done their best, but it seemed that they were still unable to change this outcome. That Almighty seemed to be invincible. It was also like a huge mountain. Even if you used all your strength, you still wouldn't be able to surmount it. Mu Yang didn't feel dispirited. Instead, he forcefully took a deep breath and sped up the flow of spirit energy into his body. He knew that Xiao Yang had forcefully taken a few punches in order to create an opportunity for him. Now, it could be said that Xiao Yang's fate was unknown. Therefore, all the heavy responsibilities from now on would fall on his shoulders. Under such circumstances, only he, Mu Yang, could continue to fight with the help of the sky orderliness matrix. If he retreated, the drifting cloud realm would be gone. Therefore, he had to step up. Even if he died in the end, he had to die bravely in battle and not be humiliated to death by cowardice. They had already declared war and fought to this extent. Even if he begged for mercy, it would be of no use. In the next moment, a ray of light exploded. Instantly, the fire dragon was shattered into pieces and turned into countless sparks that fell down like a rain of fire. Han Jingming was in an extremely sorry state right now. Most of his clothes had been burned, and even his skin had been scorched like charcoal. At the same time, Han Jingming also suffered some internal injuries. Because of the heat, he was a little delirious. You want to kill me with just this little bit of strength? You are all too naive. Han Jingming shouted angrily. Now, Han Jingming was extremely angry. In the previous battle, he did not even move his body. Now he was in such a sorry state. How could he continue to maintain his rationality? Being forced to such a state by a group of juniors was an incomparably shameful thing. How could he accept it? At least, in Han Jingming's opinion, it was a humiliation to him. Very good. You ants have thoroughly enraged this sovereign. Now, are you all ready to pay the price? Han Jingming shouted angrily. This sentence could be said to be heard by all the cultivators in the drifting cloud realm. In an instant, many people were terrified and trembled. What countless people saw was as if the end of the world had arrived and their home was about to become a purgatory on earth. Everyone's hearts were towards their master, Xiaoyang. However, after Master Xiao was beaten to the point of falling, he was no longer alive. This caused many people to fall into despair. Their strongest combat power had already fallen, so what else could they do? Many people were unwilling in their hearts, but there was nothing they could do. Now, Xiaoyang's state could be said to be very terrible. Even though he was proficient in body refinement and had the support of the true intent Wanxiang art, it was difficult for him to withstand the beating just now. Now, all the bones in Xiaoyang's body had been shattered, especially the ribs in front of his chest. They were even shattered. Even his internal organs were shattered beyond recognition. Black blood continuously flowed out from the corner of his mouth. His painful expression caused his face to become distorted, and his body trembled continuously. Now, Xiaoyang's outcome could be said to be very miserable. This was also the price he had to pay for his persistence. Master Xiao, who was lying on the ground, was also very clear about the current situation, especially after hearing Han Jingming's provocation. He shouted angrily and forced himself to sit up. However, this movement caused him to be in even more pain. He was almost about to faint. However, his willpower was supporting him so that he would not fall. Once he fell, he might never be able to stand up again. Therefore, he could not. Chapter 2032. Xiaoyang stood up shakily. His limbs and bones were in constant pain at this moment. It was like a surging tide, attacking the last line of defense of his willpower. If he lost his willpower, Xiaoyang would probably collapse and never be able to stand up again. However, various beliefs were supporting him. He clenched his teeth and forcefully held on so that he would not collapse. However, the pain was unbearable. His eyes darkened, and even his sea of consciousness became chaotic. It was as if he would die from exhaustion in the next moment. The pain was like a branding iron that constantly branded his body. He was unable to resist and could only passively endure the pain without being able to slow it down. Right now, Xiaoyang's injuries were extremely severe. If it was anyone else, they would have collapsed and fainted long ago. They would not be able to stand at all. However, Xiaoyang's willpower had become incomparably strong after experiencing so many hardships. Soon after, Xiaoyang clenched his teeth and took out a few explosive pills. He swallowed all of them as if they were dates. Not only could the explosive pill increase one's cultivation level, it could also connect all the broken tendons and allow the broken bones to recover in the shortest amount of time. Xiaoyang had already consumed many explosive pills and had long surpassed the limits of what he could endure. However, he had no other choice now. He could only do this. Immediately, a majestic medicinal power erupted at this moment. The originally broken tendons and bones were also recovering at an extremely fast speed. The explosive pill had such a miraculous effect. This was also the reason why Xiaoyang was able to win countless bitter battles. It could be said that many times it was because of the miraculous pill that he could turn the situation around. At the same time, Han Jingming had also adjusted his condition. He stood there with a furious expression on his face. Originally, he thought that he could easily deal with everything in the flowing cloud world and change it. However, who would have thought that he would end up in such a sorry state? If this matter were to spread, it would become the shame of his life. Therefore, he couldn't tolerate such a thing happening. Only the endless amount of fresh blood could wash away this pain. Han Jingming didn't look at the young man he hated the most. Instead, he looked at Muyang, who was standing on top of North Light City. Han Jingming felt that those few punches were enough to make Xiaoyang unable to stand up again, so there was no need for him to take another look. On the other hand, the person in front of him needed to be treated seriously. After all, with the support of a pseudo-spiritual vein and the mysteries of the formation, it had become an existence that could not be ignored. Previously, the fire dragon had posed a great threat to him, and he had almost been seriously injured. If he had even more powerful means, he might have suffered even more serious injuries. As such, as long as he could beat Muyang to the ground, no one in this barren world would be able to stop him. If the two bigger ants were gone, what would the rest of the smaller ants count for? When Muyang sensed that he had been targeted, his heart couldn't help but tremble. Immediately, an overwhelming pressure pressed down on his body, making it difficult for him to breathe. In an instant, Muyang's expression turned extremely ugly. At that moment, he finally felt how terrifying that oppressive might was. Moreover, Muyang had the support of the formation to share some of the pressure. This was difficult to accept. As such, he found it hard to imagine how much pressure Xiaoyang had faced back then. All of this made Muyang feel disbelief. Now, he admired that young man more and more. It seemed that his decision to nominate him as the ruler of the flowing cloud world was the right one. Although it was hard to say what would happen in the future after suffering such a calamity, at the very least, what they did was not wrong. What's wrong? Your leader has already been beaten unconscious. Are you still going to continue resisting? Han Jingming shouted coldly. Muyang snorted and said, "No matter how strong you are, you're just a stray dog. If you want to hurt the flowing cloud world, you'll have to step over my dead body." 1,000 years ago, Muyang had been training outside because he couldn't defeat the previous demon lord. He hoped that one day he would be able to solve the threat of the demon race in the flowing cloud world. However, he didn't manage to do so. However, what he was facing today was the survival of the flowing cloud world. He definitely wouldn't take a step back. What a joke! If you're willing to kneel and submit to me, I can still spare your bloodline. Otherwise, I won't leave anything behind. Han Jingming said coldly. The reason why Han Jingming suddenly changed his mind and didn't kill Xiaoyang was very simple. He had his eyes on the Northern Light City's sky circulation formation. If he could control this formation, he would be able to quickly recover from his injuries. When the time came, he might even be able to fight against the Almighty from the God realm. In fact, it was hard to say who would win in the end. Even if everyone in the flowing cloud world dies in battle, we won't be enslaved by you. Muyang said coldly. The moment these words came out, Han Jingming was instantly infuriated. These unruly people were really stubborn. Since you want to die, I'll kill thousands of you. Han Jingming shouted angrily and slammed his palm down. Although he couldn't subdue these people, Han Jingming didn't think much of it. No matter how exquisite this formation was, as long as he studied it carefully, he would be able to find some clues. However, it was just a little troublesome. So what? On the other hand, these ants were extremely annoying. Only by killing them now would he feel satisfied. Otherwise, their arrogance would really make him unhappy. Seeing this, Muyang didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately used the vermilion token as a medium to quickly mobilize the spiritual energy in the formation, preparing to block the attack. It could be said that the sky circulation formation gave Mu Yang unparalleled strength, but at the same time it also restrained him, making him unable to move. Faced with such a ferocious attack, he couldn't dodge it. He could only brace himself and receive it. Instantly, countless amounts of spiritual energy passed through the Zhu Yan token and formed a wall of fire in front of them, blocking their path. It was like a flaming shield blocking between them. It was the Northern Light City's barrier. Jade shattering sky palm. Han Jingming slammed his palm down again. Chapter 2033. Han Jingming had been through many battles. He knew that if he attacked, he would definitely be stopped and he would not be able to achieve his goal. However, if he followed up with another attack, it would be impossible to defend against. Only then would he be able to see the greatest effect. When the attack landed, the seemingly indestructible wall of flames was smashed into pieces and no longer existed. Fortunately, the power of that palm strike had been completely exhausted. However, in the next moment, Mu Yang's eyes were filled with shock and fear. This was because he sensed an even more terrifying power appearing and bombarding him. If he was hit by it, he would probably die immediately. In fact, the heavenly cycle orderly formation beneath his feet would shatter under the impact of such a huge force. In fact, countless cultivators had died because they were closely related to the formation. At that moment, Mu Yang's heart was about to fall into despair. He never would have thought that this old monster would have such a trick up his sleeve. It was truly impossible to defend against. However, Mu Yang did not retreat. He knew that if he left now, he still had a chance. However, if he left, everything would be over. Without the support of the sky circulation formation, he would probably be crushed to death by Han Jingming's 2 fingers. Instantly, Zhu Yanling's flames burned brightly. Even though he knew that he was in a desperate situation and that only death awaited him, he still had to try. Perhaps he would really be able to block this attack? Even though the possibility was very small, he still had to try. This was their world. No matter what, they had to protect it at all costs. Even if he were to die now, he would die for the sake of the flowing cloud realm. He would die without regrets and with a clear conscience. Streaks of flames appeared, forming a barrier. However, compared to the speed of the attack, it was far too slow. Suddenly, a powerful aura shot into the sky. Both Mu Yang and Han Jingming looked over in surprise. They had not expected the young man to charge at them again. After Xiao Yang's body recovered a little, he swallowed a lot of pills in one go. He originally wanted to wait for a while longer and make his move after he recovered more. However, he did not expect that Han Jingming was completely enraged and had started to kill him. Therefore, he had no choice but to take action and block this attack. Otherwise, if anything happened to Mu Yang, the heavenly cycle array would be affected as well. At that time, they might really be on the path to death. To defeat Han Jingming, in Xiao Yang's opinion, none of them could be missing. No matter who was missing, they wouldn't be able to face it alone. Brat, how is he still alive? Or is there some kind of divine medicine that allows him to recover so quickly? Han Jingming muttered to himself. His desire to kill grew even stronger. It could be said that Han Jingming had seen too many impossibilities in this battle. This was something that he couldn't understand. He didn't know what was going on. From this young man, he saw too much illogical and unbelievable. But so what if you can jump around? Everything was already set in stone. It wasn't something that could be changed by a moment of bravery or perseverance. You're just a moth to the flame. I want to see how long you can last under my jade shattering sky palm. Han Jingming said with a vicious look in his eyes. Mu Yang's heart was filled with shock. He had never expected Xiao Yang to be able to continue fighting. In an instant, Xiao Yang stood in front of Mu Yang. His hands started to move rapidly. Xiao Yang's attitude was very clear. If anyone wanted to touch Mu Yang and the heavenly cycle array, they would have to get past him first. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get away with it. Han Jingming narrowed his eyes. The playful look in his eyes became more and more intense, because what he saw was a laughable moth that was about to be annihilated into ashes. Great shift technique! Xiao Yang roared. Immediately the space rippled. It was like a ripple on the surface of water. It was very quiet and silent. The space was constantly twisting and changing. In such a hurry, the great shift technique was the only thing Xiao Yang could use. Furthermore, this was also a major killing move. If it were to succeed, then the result of the battle would be extraordinary. It could be said that the great shift technique had always been Xiao Yang's trump card. This move was enough to catch opponents who were stronger than him off guard. That was why it had such an unexpected effect. The power of the palm continued to pour into the mysterious space. The crowd, who had already given up all hope, was astonished when they saw this scene. They felt that it was a little unbelievable, especially Muyang. He was also shocked. He had never seen such a move before. However, he knew very well that this move was probably Xiao Yang's final trump card. At this moment, even Han Jingming's eyes were filled with shock. He had never seen such a martial skill or technique before. It was simply too miraculous. What is going on? Han Jingming's heart was filled with shock and anger. This situation was unheard of and unseen. He originally thought that this young man was just asking for death. He did not expect him to have a technique that could deal with it. This was really hard to believe. Xiao Yang gritted his teeth and held on. However, due to the lack of strength, he could no longer maintain the great shift technique. Immediately, the space closed and the remaining palm energy poured into his body. Haha, I knew it. How could there be such a crazy and heaven-defying technique? Han Jingming laughed heartily when he saw this. This technique was indeed powerful. It could completely absorb the opponent's attack. However, this could only be done when the opponent's strength was on par with his. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was only at the level of King Wu. How could he be compared to him, a martial emperor? Han Jingming wanted to see just how strong this young man was. He did not die after taking a few punches. Now that he was hit by this palm, he wondered if he could survive. Even if it was King Qin or King Zhao of the God Realm, they would have to avoid this attack. Han Jingming felt that it was an honor for him to use his ultimate move against a small, drifting cloud world. However, in the next moment, Han Jingming's face changed. He felt a terrifying aura descending from above his head. Chapter 2034. At this moment, Han Jingming was really panicking because he could feel that his aura had been completely locked onto. The space above his head was also trembling and trembling. With such a sudden change, he felt even more unprepared. What was going on? Han Jingming did not know, and he did not have much time to think about it. Therefore, he could only push his hands up. Countless amounts of energy poured out from his palms, forming a protective barrier. However, in the next moment, when the space opened, Han Jingming was even more shocked. This was because the energy he felt was his own. It was his own jade breaking sky palm, and he was the one who unleashed it. However, it was now attacking him. Why was this happening? All of this left Han Jingming no time to think because the attack was already upon him. He could only resist with all his might, hoping that he could block this attack. Han Jingming was naturally very clear about the power of his own palm. If he could not block it, he would probably be seriously injured. This was not the full power of that palm. Boom! This palm pressed down directly, causing Han Jingming to fall. He could not resist at all, giving someone a taste of their own medicine. This was the best way to go. Many of the cultivators in the flowing cloud realm were extremely shocked when they saw the scene. It's that move! Some of the cultivators in the Anya clan had seen this strange technique before, but they did not expect Xiao Yang to have practiced this technique to such an extent that he could use it as he pleased. At the same time, Xiao Yang was not having it easy. The power of the jade breaking sky palm was pouring into his body, and it was difficult for him to resist. Mu Yang immediately regained his senses and roared angrily. He immediately mobilized the power of the cosmic circulation array and reached out his hand. A flaming palm wrapped around him and began to block the attack. Although this was not very useful, and he did not know how much damage it could block, it was enough as long as it could reduce some of the damage. Booms rang out continuously, and Xiaoyang was constantly pushed back. Mu Yang also continued to pour in energy, trying his best to protect Xiaoyang and help him share the damage. Boom! Xiaoyang was blasted directly into the Borealis city. Immediately, a large number of buildings were razed to the ground. In fact, some cultivators even suffered from the calamity and lost their lives. Immediately, the heavenly cycle orderly formation began to waver. Due to the lack of something, it began to totter. Hurry up and fill in the missing items. Don't let the formation collapse. Chu Tain shouted when she saw this. Sun Yukai immediately ordered Arctic Gray Feather, Qian Guangqi, and the others to quickly set up those things. Now was not the time to feel heartache and calculate the casualties. Xiaoyang lay in the deep pit with a helpless look in his eyes. He was almost numb to the pain. City Lord, are you all right? Sun Yukai immediately rushed over and asked. Explosive pill. Xiaoyang said with a trembling voice. When Sun Yukai heard this, he already understood. He immediately took out an explosive pill and fed it to the city lord. The tendons and bones that he had painstakingly recovered were now broken into pieces. The only method that could be used was still the explosive pill. His family was so rich that he could be so willful. If it were not for the explosive pill, Xiaoyang would not be able to use all of them, no matter how many techniques he had. Give me 2 more. Xiaoyang felt that the speed was too slow and said anxiously. The battle situation was not clear yet. Therefore, he had to recover in the shortest time possible. It could be said that there was no time to waste. Perhaps, in the time it took to brew a cup of tea, a monstrous change would occur. When Sun Yukai heard this, he was stunned. Naturally, he knew the mystery of the explosive pill. However, he also knew that if this pill was consumed in one go, the side effects would be very terrifying. Nevertheless, Sun Yukai immediately fed it to Xiaoyang. After all, now was not the time to care about the side effects. Killing the powerful enemy was the most important thing. If they could not, there would be no future for them. After consuming the explosive pill, Xiaoyang immediately felt better. Mu Yang stood in the air and quickly searched for Han Jingming's whereabouts. Found you! Mu Yang was overjoyed. He immediately activated the order of Zhu Yan and attacked again. Furious Dragon burns the world. Although Mu Yang was worried about Xiaoyang, he knew what was the most important thing now. Since Han Jingming had taken half a hit from him, he must not be feeling good. Therefore, now was the best time to follow up with another attack. If he could take advantage of this opportunity to kill Han Jingming, it would be a wonderful thing. After taking a hit from him, Han Jingming was in a terrible state. Even his tendons were injured. A trace of black blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Now that Han Jingming was seriously injured, his heart was burning with rage. He did not expect that he would be so severely injured even though he had the power to crush his opponent. It was a great humiliation. However, Han Jingming did not think too much about it. He felt that since he had fallen so many times, what was the point of suffering so much humiliation? As long as he could make his opponent fall once, it would be enough to make them unable to get back up again. That was enough for him. Everything else did not seem so important at this moment. However, just as Han Jingming stabilized his breathing, he saw a fire dragon circling towards him. It was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It was very majestic. What a clown! Do you really think you're a big shot? Han Jingming snorted coldly. He ignored his own injuries and rushed towards the fire dragon. At this moment, Han Jingming's body emitted countless rays of light. Every ray of light was sharper than a sword and more domineering than a blade's aura. Currently, Han Jingming had completely lost his mind. All he wanted to do now was to use the cruelest method to kill all of his opponents. Originally, Han Jingming wanted to vent the anger in his heart. However, he did not expect that after repeated setbacks, the anger in his heart had accumulated even more. Boom! Han Jingming's fist landed on the fire dragon's head. Then his fists rained down like a storm. In an instant, the fire dragon was reduced to nothingness. His fists were also charred black. One could almost see his bones. Mu Yang's mouth twitched when he saw how terrifying Han Jingming was. Chapter 2035. You think a little loach can kill me? Don't you think you're overthinking things? You must be dreaming. I'm a martial king, a top-notch expert. How can ants like you touch me? Han Jingming roared angrily. His hair stood on end, and he stood there like a furious god. Mu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. His heart was filled with mixed feelings. He had never thought that a martial emperor would be so terrifying. He had truly underestimated his opponent, which was why things had turned out this way. If that was the case, what kind of method could he use to defeat him? Right now, his mind was in a state of chaos. That was because he really had no other choice now. He thought that Xiao Yang's move was the beginning of turning the situation around. Everything would be reversed, and impossible would become possible. But now, it seemed that what he had done before was also largely futile. A martial king was like the ceiling of the 3,000 small worlds. How could it be so easy to defeat him? Perhaps Xiao Yang and Mu Yang would be able to do whatever they wanted in the 3,000 small worlds if they joined forces. However, if they met a martial king, it would be difficult for them to defeat him. After all, a martial king and King Wu were only one level apart. However, the gap between them was immeasurable. Mu Yang felt helpless and sorrowful. He could only hope that Xiao Yang could get back on his feet quickly. Otherwise, they would be in big trouble. If they joined forces, they might have a chance of winning. Otherwise, they could only be defeated one by one. Furthermore, their opponent would not need to spend much effort. Xiao Yang lay on the ground, feeling his bones and veins recovering quickly. However, he was still very anxious. He felt that this speed was still too slow. If only it could be faster. However, because of the effects of the medicine, his recovery speed was very slow. He couldn't continue at all. Sun Yukai was also very anxious. He was sweating profusely. In this battle of life and death, he could not do anything. He could only watch from the sidelines. This made him feel very helpless. Qian Guangqi and the others immediately repaired the missing part of the formation so that the heavenly circulation sequencing formation could continue operating without any stagnation. Although they had already done everything that they could do, they were still unable to do anything. However, they still did not have a chance of winning. Many people felt a dark cloud over their hearts. They started to feel despair. In the next moment, to everyone's surprise, Xiao Yang suddenly soared into the sky. Like an arrow that had been released from a bow, he once again stood upright in the sky. After recovering his spiritual energy, Xiao Yang forced himself to take a deep breath. He had to stand up. Xiao Yang was like a cockroach that could not be killed. He was full of vitality, even though he was severely injured and almost lost the ability to continue fighting. However, he relied on his own unique medicinal pill to stand up. When Han Jingming saw that the young man had regained his ability to fight and stood up, he couldn't help but frown. Now he was really a little depressed. Xiao Yang might have had some unique method or technique that allowed him to stand up again. But now, he stood up after being severely injured. This made people a little confused. What was going on? Han Jingming was extremely depressed in his heart. If that was the case, how was he going to continue this battle so that he could kill him? However, Han Jingming did not dare to act rashly. The strange method Xiao Yang had used made him very wary. The stronger his attack, the more likely it was that half of it would return. He would not be able to take more than a few hits. Therefore, he had to be careful. On the other hand, Xiaoyang seemed to be completely unaffected. This made people unable to understand him. At this moment, Mu Yang's heart skipped a beat. As long as Xiaoyang could continue to fight, everything would be fine. The originally low morale of the flowing cloud world was now even more convinced that they could win because of Xiao Gongzhu's reappearance. As long as Xiao Gongzhu was here, the flowing cloud world would definitely be safe. Just like before, no one could shake it. Don't tell me you really have 9 lives. Han Jingming gritted his teeth and said angrily. Xiao Yang laughed heartily because he could feel that Han Jingming was starting to panic. If that was the case, their chances of winning would be much greater. It's hard to say how many lives I have, but before you fall, I definitely won't die, Xiaoyang said frankly. It could be said that Xiaoyang was able to last until now mostly because of his indestructible willpower. If it was not for his strong willpower, he would have fainted several times from the pain earlier. Even though his consciousness had been tortured to the point of exhaustion, he was still extremely clear-headed. His goal was naturally very clear. It was to get rid of such a strong enemy for the flowing cloud world. Even if he was going to fall, he would have to at least get rid of Han Jingming before he could be at ease. Otherwise, how would he be able to relax his tense nerves? What a joke! You want to kill me? What a joke! Han Jingming shouted coldly. Although Han Jingming was indeed panicking, it was only because he was shocked by what had happened. He found it difficult to understand. However, this did not mean that he was truly afraid. Xiaoyang shrugged with a smile. He held the Thunderfire Divine Sword and was already preparing for the next wave of attacks. After all, in this situation, he could only rely on the characteristics of his pills to continuously attack and exhaust the martial emperor to death. Perhaps this was the only way out. How could he not cherish it? Suddenly, Han Jingming's expression changed. He looked into the distance and looked at his weapon. His eyes were filled with shock. This was because he saw that his weapon, the engraved bell, had a hole in it after being burned by the high-level heavenly fire. The hole was getting bigger and bigger, and it was still burning. Because Xiaohua had obtained the characteristics of the black fire, it could devour anything. Even if it was an upper sage grade weapon, it could still devour it. Chapter 2036. Little by little, Xiaohua devoured the bell. It didn't take long for it to be completely devoured. It even moved a little as if it was burping. After eating the bell, Lil Flame began to cheer and jump around in the air. It was like a child who had eaten his favorite food and was happily celebrating. The corners of Han Jingming's mouth twitched when he saw this. At this moment, he was already somewhat unable to understand. What exactly was going on? Wasn't the ability of a high-grade heavenly flame a little too abnormal? Furthermore, Han Jingming could feel that the power of the advanced heavenly fire had increased significantly after devouring the bell. It was approaching the power of a martial emperor. At this moment, Han Jingming could no longer remain calm. In this way, he would no longer have the upper hand. Xiaohua's appearance was definitely good news for Xiaoyang. Furthermore, the current Lil Hua had become even stronger. Thus, their chances of victory had also increased by a bit. The originally 1 in 10,000 chance of winning had now increased to 30%. As the saying goes, one's loss is another's gain. Han Jingming had lost a superior sage weapon like the Sky Inscription Bell and Xiaohua's increase in power. No matter how one looked at it, it was extremely beneficial to Xiaoyang. Han Jingming was also starting to panic. Soon after, he let out a stern cry. He also understood that there was no way for him to retreat. The situation had changed greatly because of the strange advanced heavenly fire. He had to end this quickly. Do you think you can kill me like this? You're just daydreaming. You can't hurt me like this. At this moment, Han Jingming also began to shout. His entire person seemed to have become extremely resolute and cold. It was as if everything had changed for him. He was still confident that he was invincible. Xiao Yang only smiled indifferently in the face of such blind confidence. The more blindly confident his opponent was, the more beneficial it would be for him. With a thought, Xiao Hu restrained his playful heart and eyed his opponent covetously. Now, Xiao Hu's attitude towards Han Jingming had changed a little because Han Jingming was also a good tonic to him. A martial emperor powerhouse had a lot of spiritual energy in his limbs and bones. If he could devour it, then Xiao Hu's strength would increase tremendously. Your doomsday has arrived, Han Jingming growled. Suddenly, the aura of his entire body began to surge. Han Jingming knew very well that he had already taken out all of his trump cards. However, he was still unable to kill the two of them. Now that there was an additional high-level heavenly flame, they had to be even more vigilant. In fact, he had no choice but to bring out the ultimate skills that he had been keeping. It's your honor to die in my hands, Han Jingming said angrily. The current Han Jingming seemed to have completely lost his mind and gone mad. Too many things had happened today, which impacted Han Jingming's understanding. Therefore, all of this made him feel very complicated. Even his consciousness had begun to distort because of this, making it difficult for him to make accurate judgments. Of course, for Han Jingming, accurate judgments were no longer important. He had the absolute strength to crush him. Being meticulous and calculating was a requirement for the weak. Heavenly demon, curse body. Han Jingming suddenly shouted, and his entire aura began to undergo a huge change. In the blink of an eye, countless strange runes appeared on Han Jingming's body. At the same time, his strength continued to increase. In an instant, after Xiao Yang felt the subtle change, he was even more shocked. He did not expect this old monster to have such a trump card. Go! Xiao Yang roared angrily and rushed forward with his sword in hand. From Han Jingming's transformation, Xiao Yang knew that this old monster was using some secret method to increase his strength. If he were to succeed, then the scales of victory would completely tilt towards the other side. When that time came, it would truly be their time. Therefore, he was determined to kill Han Jingming before he completed his task. Haha! Fear! Tremble! You ants, tremble beneath my feet, Han Jingming said in a carefree manner. Feeling the power on his body growing stronger, Han Jingming became more and more excited. As the strange runes covered his body, Han Jingming's eyes began to turn dark green. It was very terrifying. After Xiao was spun one round, he also rushed towards Han Jingming at an extremely fast speed. Thunder Fire Sweep. Xiao Yang also used his strongest martial technique, determined to kill Han Jingming. Thousand Poison, Thunder Dragon Roar. Xiao Yang's other hand had taken out the silver lightning spear. One martial technique in each hand. He was prepared to use this as his trump card. Raging Dragon World Incineration. Mu Yang was also crazily drawing out his spiritual energy, preparing to kill Han Jingming. Now that Xiao Yang was so flustered, it was enough to let Mu Yang know that Han Jingming would become extremely terrifying. In fact, they would not be able to match him. Therefore, killing them now would be the safest way to deal with them. Perhaps it could be said that this was their only chance. If they missed it, then what awaited them would be eternal damnation. Therefore, how could they accept such an outcome? Therefore, the only thing they could do now was to attack at all costs. They had to settle everything at this point in time. When the cultivators of the flowing cloud boundary saw that Xiao Yang and Mu Yang's attacks suddenly became fierce, and they did not even care about the consequences, everyone's heart sank. They knew that such a method was quite a bit like a cornered dog jumping over a wall. From this, it wasn't difficult to deduce that the situation they were about to face would be extremely grim, which was why they were so anxious. Everyone's hearts were in their throats at this moment. They did not want to think about how terrifying the consequences would be. They only hoped that everything would go as planned, and that everything would go smoothly. Kill the strong enemy. Are you really afraid? Ants, do you really think you can kill me like this? You're just dreaming. Han Jingming saw that everyone was rushing towards him in a panic, and he was even more delighted and happy. Chapter 2037. Xiao Yang turned a deaf ear to the taunts because he knew very well that now wasn't the time to show off. If they couldn't defeat their opponent now, they would be at the mercy of others in the future. That was not good news at all. It could even be said that the entire drifting cloud realm might fall into a bottomless abyss because of this, and it would be difficult for them to prosper again. It could be said that since the day Xiao Yang became the Lord, his life was already closely related to the drifting cloud realm. That was why he attacked with all his might. He wanted to carve out a path of survival for himself and for the flowing cloud realm. Otherwise, the consequences they would face would be extremely serious. Perhaps even the drifting cloud realm would cease to exist in the 3,000 small realms. As the Lord, how could he allow such a thing to happen? Therefore, Xiao Yang was now determined. Even if he lost his life, he had to kill Han Jingming. Although the possibility wasn't very high, there were many things that would only have results after trying. If you didn't even have the courage to attack, then you were really done for. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Yang rushed over and immediately felt an incomparably huge resistance. The Thunderfire Divine sword in his hand flew out. At this moment, countless thunderbolts and flames turned into sword auras that poured out continuously. It was extremely terrifying. It could be said that this move was just to open a path, to get closer to his opponent. It's futile. Han Jingming laughed disdainfully. Although his heavenly demon curse body was only half complete and couldn't be used at full strength, it was already in existence that couldn't be underestimated. He threw a punch directly at the Thunderfire Divine Sword. Countless sword chi kept attacking. Suddenly, there was a scream as the Thunderfire Divine Sword directly pierced Han Jingming's fist. The Thunderfire Divine Sword's predecessor wasn't just a mid-grade saint-level magic weapon. It was an even higher grade magic weapon. Although its grade wasn't high now, its material was extraordinary. A sliver of surprise flashed through Han Jingming's eyes, but it soon disappeared because there were too many unexpected situations in this place. Therefore, why bother with these things now? No matter how many variables there were, as long as he could control the final outcome. That was enough. At the same time, Xiao Yang's gun arrived. The silver lightning spear was pressed against Han Jingming's abdomen. Suddenly, a lightning dragon emerged and attacked Han Jingming's body. However, the strange runes on his abdomen blocked all of his attacks. When Xiao Yang saw this scene, he was also shocked in his heart. This incantation is so terrifying. The next moment, Xiao Yang's spear tip shook and pierced Han Jingming's chest that was not covered by the spell. Suddenly, the thunder dragon directly poured into Han Jingming's body. The lightning dragon roared continuously and began to wreak havoc in Han Jingming's body. Although Han Jingming was strengthened because of the heavenly demon curse body, the process of using it was also the time when there were the most flaws and restrictions. You're asking for it. Han Jingming roared and punched Xiao Yang's head. Suddenly, Xiao Yang's vision turned black. He felt everything turn dark and his consciousness became blurry because of this. Even his spiritual sea was on the verge of shattering under the bombardment of this punch. Xiao Yang fell like a comet again, but this time he didn't resist at all. It was as if he was about to die. Raging dragon burns the world. Seeing this scene, Muyang became even more furious. He no longer cared about anything else, and unleashed another ultimate skill. The fire dragon followed closely behind and kept attacking its target. However, Han Jingming stood in the same spot and didn't move at all. It was as if he was invincible. The fire dragon's attack wasn't useless. Although it couldn't burn Han Jingming's skin, it could still hit his internal organs and cause him internal injuries. Because of the enhancement of the curse, Han Jingming was almost invincible now. Xiao Hu arrived as well. He turned into a snake and wrapped around Han Jingming's body, burning and devouring him. Although Han Jingming was protected by the curse, he still cried out in pain when Xiaohua burned him. It was so painful that he was about to break down. Another fire dragon arrived, but Han Jingming threw out a punch, shattering it. Then, Han Jingming ignored Xiaohua, who was wrapped around his body, and punched out. Boom! Mu Yang used all his strength to control the universal cycle array, but he still couldn't block the punch. He fell, and even the universal cycle array began to shatter at this moment. With the enhancement of the heavenly demon curse body, the power was already so terrifying even before it reached its peak. If he were to unleash all of it, how terrifying would that be? It was really hard to imagine. After dealing with the universal cycle array, Han Jingming began to deal with Xiaohua. He endured the pain and grabbed Xiaohua with both hands. He also used his own strength to forcefully destroy the high-level heavenly fire. To deal with this level of heavenly fire, he could only use his strength to destroy it. Xiao Yang was lying on the ground. His consciousness was already in a state of chaos. Because of the punch to the head, the backlash of the explosive pill had completely erupted at this moment. The bones and tendons that had recovered were also shattered at this moment. Under the intense pain, his body began to twitch and his muscles spasmed. Xiao Yang's heart was filled with despair. He never thought that the situation would turn around so quickly. He originally thought that the scales of victory were tipping in their favor after Xiao Hua devoured the sky inscription bell. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye they would be at a disadvantage? In fact, Xiao Yang had already become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. After sensing that Xiao Hua's aura was weakening, Xiao Yang became even more anxious. He wanted to continue fighting, but he couldn't control himself at all. Was the flowing cloud realm really going to be destroyed because of this? Was all the hard work he had put in so far going to end and be shattered? Xiao Yang still had a chance to escape. As long as his spirit left his body, he could still take over another body and start over. However, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to protect the flowing cloud realm. He didn't want to live like a coward. This was his root. If he lost his root, what was he? Floating duckweed? Lightning prison, true fire kill. Chapter 2038. Xiao Yang's heart was filled with unwillingness. He did not want to fall like this, nor did he want to start all over again. Of course, it was mostly because he already had deep feelings for the small world. Hence, he knew very well that if he really fell, then the flowing cloud realm would face Han Jingming's wrath. This place would be destroyed in an instant. He could not accept such an outcome. Hence, he had to stand up. Perhaps it was because of his willpower that he was suddenly enlightened. He felt an indescribable power surging into his body. Many people were in despair at this moment. Everything was already decided. Xiao Yang had been defeated, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The only one who could still resist was Mu Yang. However, he had also fallen after one strike. The only one who was still fighting was Xiaohua. Even though Xiaohua was extremely powerful due to its own characteristics, in the hands of a martial emperor, it was still insufficient. Hence, it was held down, and its power was constantly being reduced. Sun Yukai sat on the ground, paralyzed. Previously, when Xiao Yang returned to the North Light City, he began to develop without restraint. He even pushed the entire flowing cloud realm to its peak. He thought that this would be the time for him to show off his skills. He did not expect destruction to come so quickly. That person from the outside world was like a demon as he stood there. He had already become a mountain that no one could surpass. In the end, they could only sigh in amazement or even feel bitter and hateful, unable to control themselves. At this moment, Chu Taiyin, Qin Mingho, and the other almighties were in complete despair. Everything had happened too quickly. It was difficult for them to accept such an unforeseen event. Everyone knew very well that the flowing cloud realm was about to face a monstrous disaster. Next, perhaps everything would be destroyed in an instant. Although Xiaoyang had gathered his willpower to make himself more clear-headed, it was still difficult for him to move. In his anxiety, he obtained the fourth sword of the Thunder Fire Divine Sword. However, he did not have the ability to use it again. He felt helpless in his heart. He wanted to move, but he couldn't, after being injured time and time again. Coupled with the backlash from the medicinal pill, it was even more difficult for him to do anything. It could be said that he was now completely exhausted and did not have the ability to continue fighting. His heart was filled with unwillingness. I can't fall like this. Since he still had a breath left in him, he would protect the flowing cloud realm. This time, he didn't give himself a way out. He forced himself to stand up, but the hand holding the sword was still trembling. You can still stand up like this. Looks like you really love this world. Han Jingming laughed mockingly. Shortly after, Han Jingming raised his fist again. He was prepared to attack the North Light City. Since Xiaoyang was still alive, then he would let him watch as everything he had created was destroyed in a single day. This was probably the most torturous thing for him. With that thought, Han Jingming felt an inexplicable sense of excitement. It was as if he would feel extremely carefree as long as he did that. However, Han Jingming didn't succeed because Xiaohuo was entangled with him, making him unable to do anything else. Xiaoyang continued to forcefully raise his qi, but all he got in return was endless pain, making it impossible for him to advance even an inch. On the contrary, the spasms caused by the intense pain made it difficult for him to support himself and almost collapse. All of a sudden, a very wonderful feeling appeared in Xiaoyang's heart. Between heaven and earth, countless powers kept surging towards his limbs and bones with him as the center. Good fortune to the soul, the power of heaven and earth. Thunder, prison, true fire, annihilation. Xiaoyang finally raised his qi. He roared furiously and thrust his sword forward. At the moment, Xiaoyang was filled with thunder and fury as he shot towards the horizon as if he was tearing through the sky. That ray of light was like the dawn of hope for the entire drifting cloud realm. It made everyone's blood boil. They knew that Master Xiao was still breathing, so he stood up once again and used his last breath to prepare to fight the enemy to the end. Immediately, countless people felt deep veneration. With such a master around who had blocked so many disasters for them, what was there to be afraid of? Even the aristocratic families that had some conflicts with Xiaoyang in the past were also full of admiration after seeing this scene. They hoped that their master's wishes would come true. Suddenly, Han Jingming felt an extremely powerful aura rush over. He couldn't help but frown slightly. When he looked up, he was extremely shocked. He sensed that it was Xiaoyang's aura. This fellow had actually charged forward, once again. Furthermore, this time, he was even more tyrannical than before. Could it be that his strength was really that terrifying? Why was this happening? Han Jingming really couldn't understand, as he had encountered too many difficult questions today that he hadn't been able to find an answer to. This young man seemed to be hiding too many things on his body. Furthermore, every time he made a move and stood up, it was beyond everyone's expectations. I would like to see if you really have an undying body. Han Jingming shouted angrily as his entire body started to exert force. However, Xiaohuo was still constantly pestering him, so Han Jingming simply couldn't free himself to deal with Xiaoyang. It wasn't that Han Jingming didn't have any other methods. The aura on his body was like a sharp sword that kept gushing out. That mysterious black light was even more bizarre. It could be said that every ray of mysterious black light was enough to kill a powerhouse in the Qingwu realm. Xiaoyang still didn't retreat at all. Instead, he continued to charge forward. The lightning within the flames could be said to be unstoppable. The auras of the two people were tit for tat at this moment. The two forces were crushing and canceling each other out. Countless people were watching with rapt attention. Everyone's hearts were in their throats at this moment because they knew how the flowing cloud boundary would develop in the future. The outcome would also be revealed because of this battle. Therefore, they were also extremely concerned and wanted to know what the outcome would be. Han Jingming was extremely shocked when he sensed that his power was constantly being shattered and that the young man's sword was getting closer and closer to him. He was now a little flustered, but because he was being pestered by the high-level heavenly fire, he could only deal with this problem first before he could free himself to deal with Xiaoyang. Qi. Chapter 2039. The sound of the sharp sword piercing through the body was crisp and clear at this moment. It could be said that it was clearly heard by everyone. For a moment, it could be said that there was complete silence. Many people looked up into the sky. However, due to the intertwining of various forces, they could not see clearly what was happening inside. At this moment, everyone was very excited and expectant. Was the result what they had imagined? As for their clan Lord Xiao, had he really completed that magnificent feat that had never been done before and would never be done again? Everyone held their breaths. They could even hear their own heartbeats clearly. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. They wanted to know what the answer would be like. Han Jingming slowly lowered his head. He looked at the sharp sword in his chest, and his eyes were suddenly filled with doubt. At the same time, he was extremely unwilling. His heavenly demon, cursed body, was almost completed. However, just this point was like an end that could never be reached. It made him unable to complete it. He could only accept this somewhat tragic ending. How is this possible? Han Jingming muttered to himself. He was a martial royal realm expert. Now that he had the support of the heavenly demon cursed body, how could his heart be pierced by this brat sword? Han Jingming's heart had accumulated too many doubts. Even though he had lived for thousands of years, he could not answer all of them. Even now, he still didn't understand why things would turn out this way. At the same time, he also could not understand why. Just now, Han Jingming also felt that the heavenly force that originally belonged to him had suddenly disappeared, and all the power of this small world had entered the young man's body. It could be said that it was because of such variables and coincidences that he was in his current situation. No, you can't kill me. Han Jingming suddenly roared. He was also unwilling to accept such an ending, so he roared angrily. At least, from his point of view, he could not fall just like that. He could still continue to fight. He had not lost yet. As long as he was still breathing, he could continue to fight. However, Han Jingming saw a strange smile at the corner of Xiaoyang's mouth. This made Han Jingming even more surprised. Could this person have lost his mind? In the next moment, Han Jingming's expression changed. This was because the sharp sword in his chest suddenly erupted with an extremely violent force. Immediately, it raged rapidly in his body. Thunder and fire, two extremely domineering elements, turned into sword qi and attacked Han Jingming's body crazily. At the same time, they were also strangling his vitality. Xiaoyang had completely killed a martial royal realm expert. He was bound to wipe out all the vitality in his body. Otherwise, as long as there was a little vitality left, it would still be a hidden danger. As the saying goes, a single spark can start a prairie fire. Rising from the ashes was not a difficult task for a martial emperor. Han Jingming panicked when he felt his life force fading away. He was in fact, he did not know what was going on. He did not understand, nor could he understand. However, when he felt his vitality fading away, Han Jingming felt extremely unwilling and helpless. Now he was completely suppressed from the inside out. He could not move at all. Xiaoyang's eyes were still incomparably cold and stern. He was like an emotionless killing machine, looking at everything indifferently. It could be said that he was at ease. After hearing Han Jingming's exasperated words, many people's hearts lit up at this moment. This was because they knew very well that this attack had succeeded. The insufferably arrogant martial royal realm expert felt that his life was in danger. That was why he was so angry. To them, this was good news. It was enough to motivate them. Mu Yang climbed out of the deep pit. He looked up at the sky and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. This was because he could feel that the powerful enemy's vitality was fading away at an extremely fast speed. As long as he killed him, everything would be over. It was even to the extent that their flowing cloud field would be able to obtain even more things because of the victory of this battle. The various things involved were indescribable. At this moment, Han Jingming's heart was beyond shocked. Back when he faced the God Realm's army, he did not die even when there were 2 kings holding the fort. He was only injured and managed to escape. Today, his opponent was merely a little fellow at the peak of King Wu's realm. Was he going to die at his hands? The more Han Jingming thought about it, the more he could not accept it. How could he accept such a cruel reality? At least, to him, this was completely unreal. In an instant, Han Jingming's desire to live was telling him that if this continued, he would really be a sitting duck. In the end, he might even be reduced to ashes. He was famous throughout his life as one of the few powerhouses in the 3,000 small worlds. How could he die here? Han Jingming's desire to live was very high. This was everyone's instinct. Xiao Yang did not move. He was still doing what he was doing. He continued to pour energy into his hand, preparing to kill Han Jingming directly. The 4th move of the Thunderfire sword technique was extraordinary. Its destructive power was shocking. Even though Han Jingming was a martial emperor powerhouse, cracks began to appear on his body. Chu Taiyin and the others gradually felt the change. Old Master Xiao, in particular, was crying tears of joy. They originally thought that they would be facing a destructive attack. Who would have thought that they would come back from death's door in the end? The bald man and Qin Mingho looked at each other and smiled. Their expressions became much more relaxed because of this. In their eyes, there was more recognition for each other. They knew that they did not follow the wrong person this time. Their path of cultivation would also be different because of that young man, and they would be able to walk further on it. This guy is really unbelievable, Chu Taiyin said. She felt that it was difficult to praise such a young man. She could only laugh bitterly. All of a sudden, Mu Yang's gaze turned serious because he felt something different. Suddenly, Han Jingming's body lost all signs of life. However, a black shadow slowly rose up. That black shadow was like a demon. It covered the sky and the sun. It was terrifying. Suddenly, the hope that the cultivators of the flowing cloud realm had was destroyed. Chapter 2040. Xiaoyang, you are indeed powerful. You have created many opportunities. But so what? You're still no match for me. The black shadow laughed out loud in an incomparably arrogant manner. Xiao Yang frowned coldly as he looked over. He smiled faintly and didn't take it to heart. He knew very well that Han Jingming had given up his physical body after knowing that he had no chance of survival. He had sacrificed his physical body and forced his soul out of his body to fight for a chance of survival. It was a way to survive by cutting off one's tail. It was also a way to save one's life after reaching the martial royal realm, when one's spiritual soul could completely leave his physical body. At that moment, countless people's joy was extinguished once again. Today, countless cultivators in the drifting cloud realm felt like they were on a roller coaster, rising and falling constantly. It was as if there would never be a result until the last moment. However, when would the last moment appear? It had become a mystery in everyone's heart. It was as if it was impossible for it to appear. There were too many variables and twists, making everyone feel helpless. They really couldn't figure out what was going on. Everyone's heart was filled with discomfort and discomfort. On the other hand, Xiaoyang was as calm as ever. He even let Xiao Hu take Han Jingming's physical body away and let him devour it. Even though his spiritual soul had left his body and turned it into an empty shell, it was still a great supplement for Xiao Hu. If he could devour it, his strength would definitely increase tremendously. It was hard to say how much he could achieve. However, now was not the time to be calculative. Xiaoyang had to figure out how to overcome this hurdle. That was what he needed to face. There could not be any mistakes here. Lad, you didn't expect a martial royal realm expert to have such an ability, did you? Han Jingming said and laughed. Of course. Han Jingming was so confident because he had completed the heavenly demon curse body. Otherwise, when his spiritual soul left his body, he would have been severely injured and could only run away. How could he be so arrogant? With the support of the heavenly demon curse body for his spiritual soul, Han Jingming was extremely confident. In fact, in his opinion, losing his body this time was not a disaster for him. I just didn't expect your heavenly demon curse body to have such an effect, Xiaoyang said indifferently. Hearing this, Han Jingming's expression immediately became extremely unsightly. However, he quickly returned to normal. So what if you know? It was not so easy to block an attack from the divine soul. As long as I take over your body, although there will be a difference in my realm, it's fine. I will be able to return to that realm sooner or later. However, with your body, my strength will be stronger. At that time, what can the divine world do to me? Han Jingming said. In Han Jingming's opinion, there were too many secrets on this young man. As long as he could decipher all of them and use them for his own, his future would be limitless during the reign of power. Who knows, he might even be able to change his aptitude as a result. He might even be able to go to a higher world and achieve greater things. Wishful thinking. If you have the guts, come at me. Xiaoyang said with a cold smile. All right, I'll fulfill your wish. As Han Jingming said that, he roared and turned into a black shadow. He charged directly at Xiaoyang's body. Xiaoyang allowed Han Jingming's spiritual soul to charge into his body. He did not stop it at all. When the crowd saw this scene, they were all shocked. Especially those with higher realms, they were even more fearful. They knew very well how terrifying a spiritual soul of a martial emperor was if it could be completely unsheathed. Moreover, Han Jingming had the support of a secret technique. In the blink of an eye, Han Jingming's soul entered Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness. He hovered above it and began to laugh wildly. He did not expect everything to go so smoothly. It was so effortless. Looking at that sea of consciousness that stretched as far as the eye could see, Han Jingming was also very envious. Now he finally understood why this guy was so powerful and had such a strong will. Putting everything else aside, this sea of consciousness was several times bigger than Han Jingming's. Kid, looks like you've given me a big gift. As Han Jingming said that, he got carried away. Aren't you the one who gave me the gift? Xiaoyang said coldly. Han Jingming was stunned for a moment. Soon after, he saw ripples suddenly appear in his sea of consciousness. A huge figure slowly emerged from his sea of consciousness. At that moment, Han Jingming was completely stunned. That was because he saw that the figure was like a giant beast that had been sleeping for countless years. It had been awakened and was slowly getting up. How terrifying was Xiaoyang's cultivation in his previous life. At that time, his spiritual soul had been cultivated to an unbelievable level. Now, although it had not fully recovered, it was much more powerful than Han Jingming's. That was also the reason why Xiaoyang let him enter. In terms of physical strength, he was inferior to the other party. However, in terms of spiritual soul, even 10 Han Jingming would not be a match for Xiaoyang. How is that possible? The corner of Han Jingming's mouth twitched continuously. He found it hard to believe that what he saw was real. All of this felt very fake and unbelievable. In the next moment, Han Jingming immediately turned around and ran. He knew very well that, if he did not leave, he might be the one being persecuted. However, Han Jingming crashed into an invisible wall and was unable to escape at all. "Don't come over," Han Jingming said with a trembling voice. Although he had the support of the heavenly demon curse body, it only strengthened his spiritual soul by a lot. However, in the face of such a huge monster, he had no way of resisting at all. "Didn't you want to take over my body? Why don't you do it now?" Xiaoyang said coldly. Han Jingming trembled nonstop. He was completely desperate now. "Don't kill me. I am willing to be your dog." At that moment, Han Jingming gave up his dignity as a martial royal realm expert and began to beg for mercy in order to survive. Xiao Yang only snorted coldly. He grabbed Han Jingming's spiritual soul with one hand and threw it into his mouth. He chewed twice like he was eating beans and swallowed it into his stomach. A lackey of a martial royal realm expert was not bad, but this was a mad dog. He might bite his master at any time. Naturally, such a dog could not be left alive. Chapter 2041. Deity World, Deity's Capital. All of a sudden, a ray of light shot up into the sky. At this moment, countless amounts of spiritual qi converged towards a single location. That place was like a whirlpool, absorbing spiritual energy crazily. At a glance, it was enough to shock anyone. In an instant, countless people's gazes were attracted by the dazzling light. Countless almighties looked in that direction. All of them were extremely excited. They knew that the day they had been waiting for had arrived. They were the geniuses of the deity world, the people who had been blessed by countless predecessors. They had finally endured until that day, when they could take that step forward. In the future, to them it would be endless light. The God Emperor sat under the tree. Just as he was worried sick, he realized that the place where his daughter was had changed. As for Prime Minister Jiang Zhongqing, he had left early. Due to the disturbance in the drifting cloud realm, the God Emperor was not in the mood to continue the game, so Jiang Zhongqing left. "How is this possible?" the God Emperor mumbled. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He felt that everything he had seen was too unreal. The God Emperor knew that the fortune in the 3,000 small worlds was limited. If there were no martial emperors who had fallen, there would not be a new generation of martial emperors. However, now that his daughter, Princess Mingzhu, had started to break through, it naturally meant that there were martial emperors who had fallen. In the deity world, there were no martial emperors who had fallen. As for the Sky Sword realm and the Sun Snow realm, it was even more impossible. Those two were old but vigorous. It was impossible for them to have fallen. In this case, there was only one possibility. That was Han Jingming, who was currently in the drifting cloud realm. Could it be that the old monster had fallen? However, no matter how the God Emperor calculated, the deity world was very far away from the drifting cloud realm. Even if the three kings rushed at full speed, they would need at least half a month to arrive. Therefore, in the drifting cloud realm, there was only Xiao Yang. With his strength alone, was it possible for him to defeat the old monster and kill him? At least, in the God Emperor's opinion, it was completely impossible. Immediately, the God Emperor took out the Pisces token, ready to ask what was going on. However, although the Pisces token had sent a message, the God Emperor did not receive a reply, because there was no response from the other side. No one responded to him at all. The God Emperor's heart was still in his throat. Looking at the grand occasion, he naturally knew that his daughter's breakthrough this time meant that she had soared to the heavens. But what about that young man? The young man who had made a pact with her and made great contributions to the God realm had now become a sacrifice in this conspiracy. What happened to him? Thinking of these problems, the Divine Emperor's countenance gradually turned grim. This was because he truly could not imagine what kind of unforeseen event had occurred. There were too many problems that even the wise and mighty God Emperor was at his wits' end. However, countless people in the divine world were in an uproar. Everyone was very clear that Princess Mingzhu's breakthrough this time would also mark the beginning of their God realm's complete prosperity. At this moment, the princess, who carried countless hopes, also began to make everyone accept her wholeheartedly and be filled with hope. Furthermore, those who knew some of the inside information were even more excited. This was because to them, this would also be the beginning of their advancement to the middle world. Princess Mingzhu could be said to be a genius. Now that she was able to step into the martial emperor level in one step, it was clear how terrifying her ability would be. Even if they went to the middle world in the future, they could still continue to be strong. Geniuses such as Shen Wuxuang and Lei Dingtian were now looking at her with envy. Who among them did not want to break through to the martial emperor level as soon as possible and stand out among the geniuses? In the end, it was Princess Mingzhu who took the initiative and became a legend that belonged to her. Many people were extremely sad because of this, knowing that they would not have a chance in their lifetime. It was not easy for a slot and a destiny to appear, but just like that, it was taken away by this woman who was favored by the heavens. It could be said that Princess Mingzhu had been troubled by King Wu's peak for hundreds of years. All this time, she had been waiting for a slot to appear, but it was simply impossible. However, the change that occurred this time allowed her to take the step. At this moment, the God Emperor's heart could be said to be extremely excited, but at the same time sad. He had an incomparably deep understanding of the concept of providence. Similarly, it was not difficult for him to guess that there was no more news from the Pisces token. He was afraid that the young man had met with misfortune. The young man that he had thought highly of had died because of this. How could he not feel heartache? Not long after, a woman walked over. When she saw the God Emperor's gloomy look, she sighed helplessly. She had long known about what had happened in the drifting cloud realm. She was also a martial emperor-level powerhouse. Naturally, she knew that it was easy to kill someone at the peak of King Wu. The woman had tried before. If she wanted to hit Princess Mingzhu, it would be extremely easy. Who was Princess Mingzhu? She was a genius that no one in the 3,000 small worlds could surpass in tens of thousands of years. Under the suppression of such a big realm, no one could surpass her. Therefore, it was likely that the young man had met with misfortune. Husband, everyone has their own fate and destiny. This can't be forced. Xiao Yang is indeed outstanding, but he had such a calamity in his life. It's not your fault, the woman said slowly. Of course, for this woman, the fact that her daughter was able to take this step was already a blessing for her. The God Emperor shook his head and blamed himself. If I had understood the crux of the matter back then, I would have let second brother or third brother guard it. This unforeseen event would not have happened. When the woman heard this, she could only sigh silently. Unforeseen circumstances could happen. Back then, who would have thought that Han Jingming would escape? Furthermore, under a freak combination of factors, he had even found the drifting cloud realm. There were many variables involved, and none of them could be controlled by anyone. When he thought about the fall of such a genius, the God Emperor felt terrible. He wondered if he had praised the young man too highly, and that was why these problems had occurred. However, the God Emperor could not pinpoint the exact problem. Now he was also helpless and didn't know how to proceed. The guilt, he felt, would probably never be able to make up for it in this lifetime. Chapter 2042. In the vast sea of stars, two people who were hurrying on their way immediately stopped moving forward. Second brother, what's wrong? Emperor Qin asked curiously. Right now, they were in a hurry to travel. It could be said that they were in a hurry. So why did they stop now? I just received news that Mingzhu has made a breakthrough, Emperor De said with a trembling voice. That was because even he himself felt that this was not the truth. It was so hard to believe. For a moment, even the Qin Emperor was stunned when he heard this. He also felt that this was too inconceivable. What the hell was going on? He did not understand. He could not figure it out. However, the news could not be wrong. Could it be that Han Jingming had died? However, there were only a handful of people in the world who could kill Han Jingming. Even Emperor Qin himself did not dare to guarantee that he could kill Han Jingming. Therefore, after receiving news of Han Jingming's whereabouts, the three kings of the God realm came out together. Their goal was to kill Han Jingming and empty that spot. However, Princess Mingzhu had made a breakthrough. Was it because of luck or because she was too heaven-defying? No one knew. That was why he was so hesitant. Why is that? Qin Wang swallowed his saliva and asked. Emperor just shook his head and said, I'm not sure. Big brother only said that Xiao Yang did not reply to him. I'm afraid that he has met with some mishap. As for what's going on over there, we have no idea." Emperor Qin was extremely anxious when he heard that. Since nothing was certain, wouldn't it be a waste of time to stay here? At least, from Emperor Qin's point of view, even if Han Jingming was not dead, he had to kill him. With an extra quota, the realm of the gods would have one more martial emperor expert. So, why wouldn't they be happy about it? However, without any definite news, Emperor Qin could not act rashly. He could only wait. "Fourth brother, go to the flowing cloud realm first and investigate what's going on. If that old man is not dead, go after him with all your might. I'll return to the gods' realm first and ask Big Brother how to handle this." Emperor De took a deep breath and said decisively. The Qin king nodded, indicating that he would do as he was told. He then quickly rushed forward. Now, finding Han Jingming was the most important thing. After all, not being able to kill him last time had become a knot in his heart. This time, since there was news, this grudge had to be settled no matter what. King De sighed helplessly when he saw King Qin rushing over in a hurry. He could also imagine that Xiaoyang was most likely dead. It was even possible for him to die. This made him feel very helpless and sad. After Ziying entered the tomb of the god of sin, her whereabouts were unknown. And now, the De King's mansion's bet had turned into nothing. Because of this unforeseen event, De King felt that he had suffered a crushing defeat. Right now, De King's heart was filled with torment. However, because he had the burden of the divine realm on his shoulders, he could only put these thoughts aside for the time being. Now was not the time to worry about himself. Some things were unknown to begin with. Even if he tried his best to calculate, what was the use? The outcome was not something that could be changed by mere calculation. Right now, he could only do his best to control everything that he could control. That would be enough. After everyone saw the black shadow enter Xiao Gongzhu's body, there was no sign of life. Everyone held their breaths and watched with their eyes wide open. They wanted to know what was going on. However, not long after, they saw Xiaoyang's body suddenly fall out of control. Immediately, everyone's heartstrings tightened at this moment. Could it be that Xiao Gongzhu was defeated? Countless people were tormented in their hearts. They simply could not figure out what was going on. Everyone had many doubts in their hearts that could not be explained. As the battle ended, the sky became much clearer. However, the smell of gunpowder was still very thick and terrifying. Suddenly, the entire drifting cloud realm could be said to be covered by dark clouds. Rumble! Under the thunder, heavy rain poured down. The sound of the rain was like the galloping of countless horses. It was very grand. It was as if this heavy rain wanted to wash away all the smoke in this world, returning it to its original state without a speck of dust. Somewhere, Xiao Man gently leaped up and hugged her young master. She felt extremely uncomfortable when she sensed that her young master's bones and tendons were all broken. His organs were almost out of shape, and his aura was extremely weak. 2 streams of tears flowed down her face. It was unknown if they were the timely rain that washed away the clamor. Xiao Man blamed herself. She felt that she was too useless. If she was strong enough, then she wouldn't have to watch from the sidelines and not be able to do anything. She could only watch helplessly. At the same time, Xiao Man's heart ached. Why was her young master so foolish? He could clearly leave, but he fought to the end. Now his life was hanging by a thread. He might not even make it through today. Countless people stood in the rain. At this moment, everyone's emotions became incomparably sorrowful because they knew very well that Xiao Gongzhu's fate was already uncertain. As for whether the outsider had successfully taken over his body, no one knew. All of a sudden, Mu Yang seemed to have realized something. He rushed over to Xiao Man, his eyes filled with hesitation and reluctance. Chu Taiyin and the others seemed to have thought of something as well. Chen Mingho and the Baldi stood in front of Xiao Man, looking at Mu Yang cautiously. "Move aside." Mu Yang tried his best to control his emotions, but when he spoke his voice trembled. Chu Tain stood by Mu Yang's side, speechless. Her eyes were filled with grief. "Old man, are you going to turn against us so soon?" The Baldi scolded angrily. They could clearly sense the killing intent. Right now, Mu Yang wanted to kill Xiaoyang. That was why Chen Mingho and the Baldi had hurried over immediately. They could not fight side by side against a monster like Han Jingming. However, Mu Yang and the others were not afraid. At the same time, Xiao Chongxing also arrived. He stood between the two sides, as if he was prepared to mediate this battle. Sun Yukai was extremely sharp. He also led the backbone of Northern Light City and rushed over. Chapter 2043. In the blink of an eye, under Sun Yotsai's command, the core members of North Light City surrounded their city lord and looked at Mu Yang cautiously. As the saying goes, a person's heart is unpredictable. If this guy was going to kill Xiaoyang and take over as Lord Xiao, it was not impossible. As such, they had to be on guard. Mu Yang could not help but furrow his brows when he saw how hostile everyone was looking at him. Even though he did not have the heart to do so, he still had to do it. "Get out of the way!" Mu Yang shouted as he released his aura. Even though Mu Yang was heavily injured, he was still a cultivator at the peak of the 9th step. How could he be underestimated? Suddenly, many people also felt an incomparably huge pressure. Even those who were slightly weaker could not stand and directly fell to the ground. They were simply unable to resist at all. "Mu Yang, we respect you as our senior. How could you be so evil? Do you want to become the sinner of the entire flowing cloud realm?" Sun Yukai shouted. Even though Sun Yukai was only a level 3 Kingwu, he was still the Vice City Lord of North Light City and had seen many big scenes. As such, he was still fearless in the face of such a powerful being. "And you, Chu Tain, have you forgotten who helped you break through to the 9th Order Martial King realm?" The Baldi also stood up and reprimanded. Chu Tain's expression became even more depressed and pained when she heard this. Naturally, she knew all of this. She had received many favors, but now she had to stand against Mu Yang. In an instant, countless people looked at the two of them. When the disciples of the Taiyang sect and Taiyin sect saw their ancestor make such a decision, they felt even more pained. They couldn't understand why things had turned out this way. Everyone had countless questions in their hearts, making them feel even more pained. "Do you really think I wanted to kill Xiaoyang? I don't mind telling you that I was only able to come back alive because of his help. It was all thanks to him that we were able to get to where we are today." Mu Yang roared hysterically as tears welled up in his eyes. Many people did not understand. Since Mu Yang knew all this, why did he still want to kill Xiao Gongzhu? "Your attitude is really disdainful, but I had to kill him. If Xiao Yang's body was taken over by Han Jingming, then who would be able to fight against him? At that time, Han Jingming will use Xiao Yang's body to destroy our flowing cloud realm. Is that what you want to see?" Mu Yang roared. As soon as these words came out, many people were speechless. This was the reason why Chu Tain had chosen to side with Mu Yang from the start. Naturally, he knew how serious this matter was. Now Han Jingming was at his weakest, and this might be his only chance. If he missed this opportunity, he might not have another chance. Even though there were too many things in their hearts that they couldn't bear, they were still clear about what was more important and what was more important. They knew how to proceed. As for their drifting cloud realm, they could not withstand too many storms. If there was another problem, it would be beyond redemption. There might even be more terrifying consequences. The Baldi and Chen Mingho began to waver after hearing this. If Xiaoyang still has his consciousness, he would rather die together with the enemy than to protect himself. Mu Yang said. At this moment, many people's mood became extremely low. Everyone fell into silence. They didn't know how to choose. Only Xiao Man's gaze was firm. She believed that her young master would not be taken over by someone else. He was just tired and needed a good rest. Soon, many people could feel a magical change taking place in their bodies. They were showing signs of a breakthrough. Many people could not suppress it and had no choice but to sit down and attempt to break through. When such a situation occurred, Mu Yang and the others were also astonished. If Xiaoyang were to die, do you think it would be so effective if he were to feed the world with his cultivation? Xiao Chongxing said. Mu Yang and Chu Taiyin suddenly smiled. They finally understood. Only the death of a martial emperor could cause such a huge commotion. And this timely reign was the fate and power that this martial emperor had accumulated throughout his life. Following his death, it began to nourish the world. We won. We won. Countless people cheered at that moment. They knew that this timely reign was a signal. Mu Yang was crying tears of joy. He had never thought of such an outcome. He did not expect the young man to be able to create a new aura. It was unbelievable. However, it was the truth, and no one could refute it. Xiaoyang had won, which meant that the drifting cloud realm had won. The God Emperor waited for a few hours, but he still did not receive a reply from Xiaoyang. At that moment, he understood that the outcome was already decided. As for what had happened in the drifting cloud realm, he could only find out after investigating it. Wu Shuang, you've been to the drifting cloud realm before, so you're more familiar with it. Go with your father, the God Emperor said gloomily. On the other hand, Unrivaled God nodded slightly. His heart was filled with grief as well. After learning that his best friend might have met with a mishap, he felt even more upset. In the tomb of the God of Sin, he had seen through the Greenly Realm's conspiracy and saved everyone. However, now that something had happened, none of them could do anything. They could only let it happen. In the end, there was nothing they could do. The king cupped his hands together to show that he understood. As for the drifting cloud realm, you can stay there for a while. If there are any talented people, second brother, please guide them. If Xiaoyang has descendants, why don't you bring them to the God realm so that we can nurture them? The God Emperor said with a sigh. In the God Emperor's opinion, this might be the only way to salvage the situation. I understand, the king said. The king was a martial emperor. If someone could receive his guidance, they could become a rank 9 powerhouse in the future, no matter how weak they were. As for whether they could set foot on that level, it would depend on their own efforts and luck. Shen Wushuang was also trying his best to maintain his emotions. Now he was extremely depressed. Unforeseen events could happen, but everything had happened too quickly and caught him off guard. Treat the drifting cloud realm well. Go. The God Emperor waved his hand and sighed. Chapter 2044. Under this timely reign, countless cultivators felt the difference. It could be said that every drop of rain contained rich spiritual energy. It could be said that this was equivalent to a rain of spiritual energy. When a martial emperor fell, he would return everything he had obtained from the world to the martial emperor. This could be said to be incomparably precious. This rain originally belonged to the Greenly Realm, but because Han Jingming died in the Flowing Cloud Realm, it was returned here and strengthened the Flowing Cloud Realm's fate and spiritual energy. How terrifying would the amount of spiritual qi that a martial emperor needed to absorb be? This was something that was even more unimaginable. Thus, this gift was no small matter. Under this heavy rain, countless cultivators benefited because of it. Even cultivators below King Wu's realm broke through several realms in succession under this heavy rain, which made countless people excited. Even many people in King Wu's realm broke through their shackles and entered the next realm. Furthermore, those people with talent were even more extraordinary. They were able to obtain a lot of benefits. Under such circumstances, countless people were overjoyed. At the same time, Xiaoyang also became the faith of countless people. This was because, in their opinion, all of this was due to Xiaoyang. If it wasn't for him, how could Han Jingming have died? How could they possibly have the chance to enjoy such a gift? The heavy rain continued to fall. Many people were celebrating their new lease on life. They felt that all of this was not easy to come by. Only Lil Man was deeply worried. Her heart ached for her young master. After risking her life, this was the result that she had obtained. How could she be willing to accept this? However, Xiaoman did not say anything. Instead, she carried Xiaoyang and walked back to her house. In her opinion, perhaps only by going home could she feel more at ease. Xiaoman, old master, Xiao called out hesitantly. Xiaoman turned around and looked at old master Xiao. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Old master Xiao also wanted to say something, but stopped. He had personally witnessed Xiaoman follow Xiaoyang to this day. Even if anyone could hurt Xiaoyang, only this girl would not. However, old master Xiao still felt uncomfortable. He felt extremely pained. Right now, he felt that no matter what he did, it would be pale and powerless. At the same time, he knew very well that under such circumstances, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as it happened and was powerless to change it. You guys absorb the spiritual energy and break through first. I'll take care of Xiaoyang, Mu Yang said decisively. Everyone was a little hesitant, but they did not make a decision immediately. Because the current situation was too delicate, no one could say for sure what kind of changes would happen. After all, the human heart was the most difficult thing to predict. Xiao family's ancestor, please go with Baldi to help Senior Muyang. The city lord's condition is very bad right now. Sun Yukai said decisively. From Sun Yotsai's point of view, Baldi was someone brought back by Xiaoyang. He did not know if he could be trusted, but Xiao Chongxing was Xiao Yang's ancestor. He was definitely reliable. With the two of them watching, there would not be any trouble. Even if there were any changes, they would be able to handle it. When Chun Mingho rushed over, he would be able to stop it. Baldi and Xiao Chongxing nodded. They naturally understood what was going on. Mu Yang also understood. He only smiled calmly. Because of his change in attitude, it was normal for people to be suspicious and wary of him. However, it was naturally a good thing to have more people helping. They could also stabilize Xiao Yang's condition in the shortest time possible. Let's go, Mu Yang said, and followed Xiao Manbaldi, and Xiao Chongxing followed closely behind. The two of them were extremely cautious, and they observed carefully. Even if there were any clues, they would be able to deal with it in the shortest time possible. After they left, Sun Yukai ordered again, "Don't miss out on this great opportunity." With that, everyone immediately sat down with their legs crossed. They sat where they were and began to absorb the spiritual energy and fortuitous encounters, preparing to increase their cultivation again. After Xiao Man carried Xiaoyang back to the residence, she did not place him in the room. Instead, she placed him in the courtyard, allowing the rain to wash him away. The rainwater contained fate and spiritual qi. It could be said to be a great tonic. If Xiaoyang could absorb it, it would be of great help to him. Soon after, Mu Yang and Baldi began to take action. Baldi took out countless pills and medicines from Borealis City's warehouse, while Xiao Chongxing acted as an assistant, helping Mu Yang stabilize Xiao Yang's aura and pulse. Xiao Man had received a message from the old master Xiao. She knew that Xiao Chongxing was the ancestor of the Xiao family. With him around, there would be no accidents. As such, she watched from the side and did not stop them. At this moment, Xiao Man was also praying in her heart, hoping that her young master would wake up soon. Xiao Man was also extremely worried. She knew very well that her young master's aura was so weak that it was almost non-existent. He might die in the next moment. As such, what they were doing now was to preserve Xiao Yang's aura so that it would not completely disappear. In the end, he would die from exhaustion. Mu Yang was so busy that he was drenched in sweat. Although he was also heavily injured, he couldn't care less. The spiritual energy in his body continued to flow into Xiao Yang's body, helping him stabilize his heart and regulate his breathing. When Mu Yang sensed the situation in Xiao Yang's body, he was even more shocked. His heart was filled with desolation. He could feel that the young man's bones were all shattered, and even many of his 8 extraordinary meridians were broken. As for the 5 spiritual veins, They were showing signs of drying up. Fortunately, this timely rain was constantly replenishing the spirit veins in Xiaoyang's body. With such heavy injuries, even if he could recover, it would take a very long time. In the future, whether or not Xiaoyang would be able to recover to his peak fighting strength had become a huge problem. At least, in Mu Yang's eyes, the chances of that happening were extremely small. However, he was Xiaoyang. He was the Xiaoyang who constantly created miracles. Who knew if he could create another miracle? As for what would happen in the future, that was naturally for the future. How to get out of this predicament was the most important thing. Everything else could be ignored. However, when his energy entered Xiaoyang's body, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. Mu Yang felt even more helpless.